Hello, everybody, and Happy New Year, and welcome to another episode of Jackman Radio. I am your host, Mike Jackman, and I am joined tonight by JFK researcher extraordinaire and author and independent investigator, Mr. Cory Hughes. Cory, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Good. Thanks for coming on. So, as I was just saying before we went on air, I only recently just discovered your work, and I was like gobsmacked, man. This is the book, guys. A Warning from History by Cory Hughes. And he names names. He goes into details and areas of information about the assassination that you really don't see anywhere else. And I saw an interview that you did with Ryan Dawson, and I was super impressed. And I kind of went into a freaking rabbit hole. And after I was done with work every day, instead of watching anything else, I just went through a lot of your videos on your website, coryhughes.org, and your Odyssey, and I think you're on Rumble. And man, what got you into all this? Where did you? The Kennedy rabbit hole seems to be your number one kind of area of interest and research. What got you going on it?
Sure. Well, I've always had the curiosity, but after I kind of got started with research back in like 2015, spent a couple of years on the Holocaust, and then I needed to know, and so through several conversations with Mr. Dawson, he basically prompted me into starting research on Kennedy. And so that's it. That's how it goes. And that's the story of my whole life at this point, because that's what I do. And that's what I plan on doing for the foreseeable future. There's so much left, despite the work that I've done. I still think that everything I've presented in the book is maybe 30% of the picture.
Yeah, because we're talking about almost a 400-page book here. And you even alluded in the book that you could write another. Yeah. I mean, it could just be infinite, just ongoing.
I've already outlined the chapters for my next book. It's like 16 chapters. The next book will be like 500 pages, and that's all about the connection between the mafia and the Israelis. So,
wow.
And that's all. That's it. It doesn't even really talk about CIA much. I mean, it's all going to be about those two.
Right. Well, I mean, I think at this point, when you're talking about the CIA, you can also include the mafia and Mossad in there. It's almost like one big.
I don't know what it is today. That came to an end sometime in the 70s, I think, or loosened up in the 70s. I mean, I'm sure there's still connections there because the mafia still sells drugs and the CIA still brings in the drugs. So there's that relationship, right? So, but it seems like a lot of these guys just went legit. A lot of the guys who were gangsters went legit. They didn't have to. They had millions and millions of dollars, and so they could start regular businesses. They didn't have to do all this stuff. And when the mob, if you ask me, like the mob really kind of fell apart in the 70s. All the stuff with like Gotti in the 80s and whatnot is kind of like a different thing. It's not the old school mafia,
No. It's funny to see a lot of these guys on podcasts now too. They're like personalities now. Some of these guys, Sammy the Bull, and
I've watched a ton of Sammy's stuff, and just because I like the stories, and it is wild. But like, there's not much room for the mafia these days. Like, what are they going to go shake down Starbucks for some protection money? Like, everything's corporatized, so there's no mom and pops to shake down anymore. It's a different world, So I don't know what they're doing. I mean, they got to be just doing the drugs and maybe some gambling stuff. And I don't know.
If they did a woke program or a DEI initiative, they could probably get some government funding to do that. I mean, David Ferry was proto DEI. It's I have one little weakness. As when Joe Pesci plays him in JFK, and he's like, the mob and the CIA working together. You say it like it's some distant thing, and that's the thing about this. When you talk to people about the JFK assassination, and obviously we just hit the 60th mark in November, people are like, oh, was it the mob? Was it the CIA? Was it the Cubans? Was it this? And it's like, I think they're missing the big picture that it can be elements of all of those things.
And in 63, these are all one organization. And so structurally, when I look at it, I mean, so the reason I went right to the shooters and started with the shooters, it was my goal ultimately in the beginning, because no one seems to have been able to identify anybody in 60 fucking years. Right. And so I was like, if you can get the shooters and then you can figure out their connections from there and reverse engineer everything from there, it's obvious then who was involved and who's not involved. Right. So to this very day, people still talk about the Dallas oil guys and,
Clint Murchison and H.L. Hunt and Bird.
Right. Like, fuck all those guys. Like, those guys are periphery at best, and maybe like Bird provided the book depository to the CIA, who was running the book depository was CIA front, obviously. Right. And it was being run out of that building only for a couple months. prior to that, right, in July of 63 is when the book depository moved into that fucking building for the sole purpose of this assassination.
From most of their stuff was in Daltex before, right?
They were in the Daltex only for a couple months, 2 to 3 months. I mean, I think they moved into the Daltex in February of 63. And by July, they had moved into the Texas School Book Depository. However, they maintained the warehouse. There was a warehouse on Houston Street that I think was connected to the Daltex, or maybe the next building over, that was still at play, where you had guys like Ed Shields who were working there that morning. And Ed Shields is the guy who debunks Buell Frazier's ever having driven Oswald to the book depository that morning. Ed Shields testified before the House Committee on Assassinations that when Frazier arrived, somebody had called out to him, "Hey, Frazier, where's your rider?" And then Frazier called back, "I dropped him off in front." Well, that's not the story Buell Frazier's been telling for 50, 60 years. He's been saying that he drove Oswald to work and Oswald had a package under his arm, right? The alleged curtain rods, but everyone tried to make it into the rifle. And then he walked through the railroad yards and into the back loading docks, right? That's what he told the whole world and still tells the whole world. But no, Ed Shields testified that he called out to this person, "I dropped my rider off out front." Ed Shields heard that. So obviously, Buell Frazier never drove anyone to work that day. And then when you look into the statements he made about what Oswald was wearing when Oswald came to his house that morning, he said that Oswald was wearing a gray, more or less flannel wool type jacket, which makes no sense at all because Oswald, as we all know, allegedly went to the boarding house to pick up his light gray or tan jacket, or I don't even know what fuck color, that super light color jacket that was found at the Texaco, right? So he wasn't wearing a jacket when he got picked up that morning by Buell Frazier. So I don't know what the fuck Buell Frazier's talking about, saying that he was wearing a more or less flannel wool type jacket. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Frazier published a book too, Cory, and one of the first things he says in the book is, "I've always been able to fool people. I've had an ability to get people to trust me and to fool them." And it's like, is that like an admission? Why would he say something like
There's
that?
There's a lot of that going around in Kennedy. Kerry Thornley did that a whole bunch. Kerry Thornley gave a 50-page confession to Garrison where he made all kinds of statements like that.
We're going to move around a lot tonight, folks. Cory and I are going to be going back and forth on all kinds of subjects. So if you're new to this information, if you've been looking at it for a while, we hope you'll look at everything that we say. And again, we hope that you'll get Cory's book, A Warning from History, and check out his work there. But I've kind of always shied away myself from trying to name who the shooters were, I've obviously been asked that a lot. Who do you think it was actually pulled the trigger? And I usually just say, well, I know that it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. It wasn't the guy that we were presented to at the guy who was arrested at the theater and the guy that we were shown at the Texas jail. That's not the guy who actually shot him. So that's what I say. I really do know, but you're not afraid to kind of go into the nitty gritty, and it seems like you've been able to really deduce who these mechanics actually were, who they might have been, who actually pulled the trigger, who was there with a rifle or a spotter or someone who, was doing, telecom down there. So why don't we go into that? We'll start with the shooters. So
sure.
you kind of name is, maybe up to 9 shooters possibly.
Right.
How did you get there? And what kind of really deep evidence do you have for that?
Well, let's look at this thing from a couple different angles, right? So we'll get to New Orleans and how everything converged around New Orleans and all the evidence surrounding New Orleans. But in the months leading up to the assassination, I found that the vast majority of sightings of Lee Harvey Oswald were not Lee Harvey Oswald. It was somebody impersonating Oswald or going and leaving the impression that they were a communist, so that this person, whomever they interacted with after the assassination, would be like, "Oh my God, I think I remember that guy. He was talking about communism in my store," or whatever. And so then they would call the FBI. You got like 50 incidents like this where people are calling the FBI saying, "Hey, I'm pretty sure I interacted with Lee Harvey Oswald." The FBI goes out and takes their statements. And then you end up going through all of these statements of the various witnesses, every place from Miami to Baton Rouge to Dallas to New Orleans to you name it, Shreveport, Louisiana, all over the place, Alice, Texas, dozen places in Texas. You start to look at these descriptions that people give of Oswald. And then after a while, after you start to really just absorb all this data that's out there, you start to see some patterns. You start to see that many of these Oswald sightings, you have Oswald where he's identified with a large husky Latino, as it's often described. and he's often described as having a pockmarked face or some sort of or moles on his face or something like that. And when you really get through the immediate cast of characters of who is surrounding David Ferrie in New Orleans and who's bouncing back and forth across the country with this Oswald character, you come to realize that this guy with this large husky Latino with a pockmarked face is a guy named Lawrence Howard. Lawrence Howard was a Mexican-American, born in America, but he goes through the Marines in about 59-60, hooks up with the anti-Castro Cuban group, and he's down in Miami with Interpen, which is a group run by Jerry Hemming, which ends up moving to Lake Pontchartrain, north of New Orleans, and they end up getting raided by the FBI. Although there's some controversy over whether or not they were actually ever raided by the FBI, believe it or not. So, but nonetheless, you have Lawrence Howard, who's a dark-skinned Mexican-American, and he's constantly being seen across the country with this guy who looks like Lee Harvey Oswald. And when you really get into who's who, come to find out that he's running across the country for 2 years straight with this guy named William Seymour. And William Seymour is a short guy, very thin. He has receding hairline, very sharp features like his nose and his jaw. And to many people thought that he looked like Lee Harvey Oswald. And so you can categorize all of the sightings of Oswald that he's accompanied by a large husky Latino with a pockmarked face. Oftentimes they have a third person with him who matches the description of a guy named Lauren Hall. You can take all of these incidents and you can kind of separate them and put them off to the side. Okay. Then you come across a whole bunch of other incidents of Lee Harvey Oswald where he's seen with a pregnant woman or he's seen with a woman with a couple children. And this is everywhere from Baton Rouge, Louisiana to Alice, Texas to Fort Worth, all over the place. And after a while, you come to realize that this person is not Lee Harvey Oswald, despite the fact that he's with a person who is apparently Marina Oswald and their children. And we know this because ultimately the description of the person describes him as slightly too tall, a little bit more of an asshole than Lee Harvey Oswald. And he's often seen with a couple days stubble and disheveled hair, whereas Lee Harvey Oswald is always described as clean cut, clean shaven. Never will you find him having any kind of stubble or a beard or anything like that, right? So I basically was able to separate all of the Oswald sightings that were questionable into two categories. And ultimately, I was able to link those two categories to two people, William Seymour and the other person being Kerry Thornley. Kerry Thornley, having been a Marine who knew Oswald for several months in El Toro, California, at the Marine base out there where they ran Marine Air Squadrons number 4 and number 9. Number 9 is where he meets Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald is on his way out of the Marines, and Kerry Thornley had about 6 to 9 months to go. Not enough time to be sent overseas, but nonetheless, they end up sending him overseas to Atsugi, and he ends up in Marine Air Control Squadron number 1, where he is in Oswald's old unit. Now, we know that from the time he got there, it was only there for a couple months. He ends up leaving there in October of 1959. So in the few months that he's there, we know that he's, number one, using an alias. He's using an alias of Rick Thornley. And he's also investigating Oswald's old unit, asking a lot of questions about Oswald, asking a lot of questions about the men in Oswald's unit. We know this because of a guy named Ronald Schwinghammer, who spoke with the FBI and subsequently Jim Garrison. And he told them this. And so this is very unusual. Why would Kerry Thornley, a guy who had just met Oswald and wasn't very close to him, and really the only person who had attested to Garrison or anyone else that Oswald was a communist in the Marine Corps, why would he be asking all these questions about Oswald in Atsugi after Oswald had already been there, right? Mm. So then we have some contradiction on Kerry Thornley stating when he found out about Oswald returning or defecting to the Soviet Union. We have some statements that he found out while he was still at Atsugi. Others he found out on the way home. But nonetheless, once he finds out in around October of 1959 that Lee Harvey Oswald had defected, he starts to write a book about Lee Harvey Oswald called The Idle Warriors.
It's just the distinction of being the only book written about Oswald before the assassination.
Yes. Yes, indeed. And so he begins to write this book, and really the book is about a bunch of... it's like about his Marine Corps unit that was out there that really wasn't doing anything, had to be there, but they really didn't have much to do. And so they ended up just sitting around most of the time, right? They were idle warriors. They were, Marines who were just hanging out doing nothing. And it went to show the mindset of these people. And then he ends up basing it on Oswald because Oswald he felt was a good character, but none of it makes any sense. None of the story of him writing this book makes any sense whatsoever. And so ultimately he gets back from Japan, leaves the Marines, and ends up going back home to Whittier, California, where he grew up. But allegedly by February of 1961, he is back in New Orleans. And this is the exact time that these duplicate Oswald sightings start to appear. Like the first one that is well known is in late January 61, and that it is at the Bolton Ford dealership. The thing is, it's in late January of 61. However, Kerry Thornley claims that he doesn't get back to New Orleans until February of 61, but we really can't believe what he says with his dates and times. But the Bolton Ford incident is significant because it's the first time that we have a duplicate Oswald sighting, where somebody gives the name Lee Oswald. Apparently looks kind of like Lee Oswald, receding hairline, about 5'10". I'm convinced it's Kerry Thornley, and I'm convinced the man who goes there who gives the name of Joseph Moore, I'm convinced that is also Lawrence Howard, because later on, Kerry Thornley will give the name of Leopoldo to Jim Garrison in his confession letter. And Leopoldo, of course, being the name that Lawrence Howard used when he went to Sylvia Odio's in Dallas with William Seymour, who then was later identified as Lee Harvey Oswald, who had given the name of Leon Oswald to Sylvia Odio. The Sylvia Odio incident, it is super important because they try to say that this is a connection between Oswald and the Cubans. Well, it's funny because none of the guys who were there were Cuban. Oswald was allegedly in Mexico City, so the official story can't really have it both ways, because Oswald allegedly passed into Mexico City on at midnight around the 26th and showed up in Mexico City at 10 a.m. on the 27th. Right?
I don't think he ever went to Mexico City personally.
Yeah, he didn't go. Kerry Thornley was in Mexico City, and that's easily provable. So you have William Seymour, Lawrence Howard, Lauren Hall going to the Sylvia Odio's, and that happened. I can tell you exactly when that happened. It happened on September 27th. Because it was the day after Oswald was in New Orleans, provably on the 26th when he was supposed to have been in Mexico City. Oswald was in New Orleans where he was closing out his P.O. box. He submitted 2 documents to the post office on September 26th, one closing the P.O. box. The second was the one updating his forwarding address to the Payne's residence in Fort Worth. So we can say with certainty that Oswald was still in New Orleans on the 26th, not in Mexico City. Then when you start to go through Kerry Thornley's timeline, what you'll find is that in May of 1963, he allegedly left New Orleans and headed back to Whittier, California, where he stayed with his parents, allegedly had a job at some restaurant. But on the way to Whittier, California in May, he stopped off in Mexico City. Why he did this, we don't know, but we know that he did this and that he stayed there for at least a day before getting back on a bus and heading to California. He then returns to New Orleans in September. He arrives back in New Orleans on September 4th of 1963, which is perfect fucking timing for the next stage of events to come. But he does it instead of just going from California to New Orleans, he goes back through Mexico City. Why? I don't know. However, he then spends 3 weeks in New Orleans where he is seen with a ratty beard and natty hair, and he is described as looking like a bearded beatnik by Perry Russo, who sees him several times at David Ferry's apartment at 3330 Louisiana Parkway, right? So he sees him there 2 or 3 times. He's identified as Leon Oswald, the same name that is given by William Seymour at Sylvia Odio's apartment, Leon Oswald. So we have Kerry Thornley, admittedly back in New Orleans, not having a place to live. He gives an address in New Orleans to Jim Garrison that he allegedly was living at. But when you actually look at the timeline, it's apparent he couldn't have been living there. And he was obviously staying at David Ferry's house or bouncing around between places. He's seen there multiple times in that 3-week period by Perry Russo before hopping back on that bus, cleaning up, getting shaven, to where he's seen again the night of the party, allegedly where he's seen with Clem Bertrand, aka Clay Shaw, David Ferry, and a couple of Cubans, where they discussed killing the president. At first, I never used to believe that incident ever occurred, but once I realized that the person who went by the name Leon Oswald was actually not Lee Harvey Oswald, and it was actually Kerry Thornley, and that he was the bearded beatnik person who was described by Perry Russo in the weeks leading up to that party, everything fell into place, and it made perfect sense why David Ferry and Clay Shaw and Kerry Thornley would be discussing killing the president. Perry Russo gives such details as to say they discussed things like triangulation of crossfire, which Perry Russo, who was an insurance salesman, would have no idea about any of this stuff. He was never in the army, or he had no idea about any of those things. Didn't know what a telescopic sight was until he heard those guys talking about it. So I completely believe that incident occurred, but it was definitely Kerry Thornley, not Lee Harvey Oswald. So then when you start to break down all these incidents and you start to really identify the people who were misidentified as Oswald, it's clear there are only two people involved, other than a couple miscellaneous incidents, like at the Texas Employment Commission, the incident involving Laura Cottrell on October 4th. That was actually involving a guy named Larry Crawford. Yeah, Larry Crawford. And so,
he was one of Ruby's boys. He was one of Jack Ruby's boys, right?
Right. He was one of Jack Ruby's boys, but he was working for, obviously, in this mafia / CIA circuit. Crawford was working in he was working as like a carny, and like when you come to understand what the involvement with the FBI and the CIA and the mafia with the carnies is, it's because they were using these organizations as trafficking organizations to traffic people, drugs, whatever they needed, right? Like when you really dig into it, you come to find out that Ice Capades and Disney on Ice and all of these organizations, these were all used as trafficking fronts as well. By the CIA, particularly through Humble Oil. I found a connection through Humble Oil and the CIA to Ice Capades, which was cracked me up. But
is there nothing sacred, Cory?
Nothing. There's nothing sacred. Trust me, nothing is sacred at all. And so, but yeah, Larry Crawford was an interesting one-off. But I'm sure there's a couple other guys, like this guy named Mason, who kind of looked like Oswald, and a couple other people in New Orleans who look like Oswald, who I'm sure had some involvement. But the bulk of the incidents that we know of that created the Oswald legend were unquestionably William Seymour and Kerry Thornley. And so you can trace their actions all from New Orleans, all across the country, and then broken down to different places up to November 22nd, where I can't, for the life of me, seem to find any evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald ever stepped foot in the Texas School Book Depository.
Yeah, and that's another thing that you say that I've. So you don't think he even worked? He was never there at all. You think it was Seymour and possibly someone else who was
William Seymour for sure.
Posing as him at the depository all the way from September to November,
October 16th.
Because the start date is even a question with the application, right?
Right. So we get Oswald's alleged application at the book depository dated October 15th. However, we have shenanigans with the application. I forget what I found on this. I'll have to go back and double check my notes, but something along the lines of when you dig into the application and you look at the commission's exhibit number, the commission's exhibit number doesn't match, right? And so then there's an incident involving Vicki Adams where she sees William Shelley and Billy Lovelady in front of the electric panel when she comes down the stairs, and she has a diagram. That diagram is then replaced by Oswald's application to the book depository. So there's all kinds of shenanigans with the commission's exhibits and them duplicating ones where it's convenient and ones are missing where it's convenient.
So another thing I kind of discovered through your work is the power was actually shut off in the building at the depository. Was that testified to by several witnesses or people who couldn't use the elevators or something?
Yes. Geneva Hine worked on the third or maybe the second or third floor. And Geneva Hine, she worked for the Southwest Publishing Company. And she attested to the fact that the power and the phones went out at exactly 12:29. And this leads us to the incident that I was just talking about with Vicki Adams. Okay, so the big deal with Vicki Adams is she is often used by the conspiracy fucking idiots to state that Oswald could not have shot Kennedy and then run down the stairs because she was on the stairs, right? So what happens is the assassination happens. She goes to the elevator. She attempts to use the elevator. The elevator doesn't work because the power's turned off, right? So She attempts to go down the stairs. She does go down the stairs. She gets to the bottom of the stairs. And so the conspiracy fucks are all like, well, she got to the stairs and she never saw Oswald, so Oswald couldn't have made it down the stairs. That is the quintessential magician's, the illusionist's trick. That is the look to the right, while the real important information is to the left. The real important information is that when Vicki Adams gets to the bottom of the stairs, she sees Bill Lovelady and William Shelley inside the building on the first floor, standing in front of the electric panel. She then runs out the back door onto into the loading dock area and then into Dealey Plaza. They never mention ever having been on the first floor. And it's extremely fucking important because where she claims to have seen them at the time she claims to have seen them is exactly when it would have occurred that the power was flipped back on. And who was in front of the power box at the time it would have been flipped back on? William Shelley. And we know this because after the elevator is stuck on the fourth floor and Vicki Adams makes it to the ground floor, we will have two people escape from the sixth floor in the elevator within a minute of the shooting. So you have this narrow time frame from 12:29 till about 12:30 and 30 seconds where the power's out and then flip back on, which coincides with Vicki Adams coming down the stairs and seeing Bill Shelley and Bill Lovelady in front of the electric panel before running into Dealey Plaza. They flip the power back on, at which point in time, Sergio Arcacha, who was on the roof of the depository, comes in from the fire escape. And we know there was someone on the roof because there was a rifle left there, which was written about by Gary Hill, or was it Gary Shaw? One of those Garys.
I think it was Gary. And there's footage, right, of the police up on the fire escape trying to bring the rifle.
That's in the Tom Aaliyah film, but Aaliyah denies the fact that there was ever a rifle up there. However, the Dallas police will then comment and tell Gary Hill or Shaw or whichever Gary it was. I always forget that one. They will deny to him. They will say that there was a rifle there, but it was left there by a security guard. And there were no security guards on the fucking roof. Okay. And so by process of elimination, I put Sergio Arcacha on the roof. And then so he comes in from the fire escape, and then him and Lawrence Howard make it down in the elevator because the power is now back onto the building within about 30 seconds after the assassination. So they make it down to the ground floor and out the back door with William Seymour, who was on the first floor guarding the elevators. And now the reason I say it was William Seymour guarding the elevators is because we have Carolyn Arnold, who says that she sees Oswald in the second floor lunchroom and he's sitting in the booth, but she's iffy on her time frame. She claims to have seen him at around 12:15, but she will later claim that she sees him at 12:25, and he's near the front door on the first floor. However, she makes contradictory statements about when she left the book depository. She tells the FBI that she left at both 12:15 and 12:25. So either way, it doesn't matter to me when she left the depository because she is the last person who will put quote unquote Oswald on the first floor. This happens between 12:15 and 12:25. We can say that with some degree of certainty based on her statements, even if one of them is wrong. And so that means that William Seymour, who was seen and identified as Oswald, is on the first floor where, by my calculations, he is guarding the elevators because the elevators need to make it to the first floor no matter what. The power has been killed and then turned back on. So he's on the first floor. They will then come down the elevator where the three of them will leave out the back door of the depository within 30 seconds to 45 seconds of the assassination. After the power is turned back on and the two of them make it down in the elevator. They then get into two of them, Sergio Arcacha and Lawrence Howard, will get into Lawrence Howard's green Nash Rambler, which is parked facing north behind the depository. This is seen by Richard Randolph Carr, who is in the County Records building on the sixth floor, which is under construction. So
is that what Roger Craig saw, do you think?
What I think Roger Craig saw. Are you referring to the person who runs down the hill?
Yeah, and gets into the. Okay,
I'll get to that. So,
okay.
So you have. The Green Nash Rambler is parked behind the book depository. You have three men emerge from the book depository: William Seymour, Sergio Arcacha, and Lawrence Howard. Two of them, Lawrence Howard and Sergio Arcacha, get in the Green Nash Rambler, and they make a loop around the block down Records to Commerce and to Houston. And then William Seymour will walk into Dealey Plaza, where he is then captured in the Robert Hughes film, about a minute and a half into the Robert Hughes film. He looks to a guy in a gray trench coat. I identified this man as Detective Trantham with the Dallas Police Department. Trantham's a whole nother can of worms. He lies about where he is, claims he doesn't get to the scene until much later. But this, it's clear that it's Trantham in this video because of the video when he's arresting Larry Floor later on, but that's a whole nother story. But it's the reason I bring that up is to make a clear line of identification of Detective Trantham to behind the book depository in the moments after the assassination, where he's seen by Gene Hill as he runs into the railroad yards. And then he's captured in the Robert Hughes film at approximately 12:32 p.m., where by my observations, William Seymour is wearing a light brown jacket, and he gives a signal, or he's given a signal by Trantham, which I kind of determined to have been a signal that Lawrence Howard and Sergio Arcacha got away in the Green Nash Rambler. Nothing really makes sense. Why else would he be there, and why else would he be giving a signal to William Seymour, who's in the building posing as Oswald, right? So from this moment here, I calculate, based on not only witness statements, but based on the only apparent timeline that we have of people going in and out of the building, is that he re-enters the front of the book depository approximately 12:33 p.m. He then notifies Lauren Hall, who's waiting inside the book depository, probably on the first floor by the back door, that the two of them got away and that he's clear to make his exit from the building. Why he didn't leave with them initially, I don't know. Something must have happened in the building, or he had to do something in the building, or maybe this is when they started to establish like the sniper's nest with the box. Who the hell knows? But I know that William Seymour re-enters the building via the front door approximately 12:33 p.m. and that Lauren Hall exits the rear of the depository at exactly 12:33 p.m. He's seen by numerous witnesses, including Velma, who is sitting in her car behind the book depository. She sees him emerge with a high-powered rifle. She gives a fairly good description of him. This high-powered rifle will then be located by the Dealey Plaza lawn crew the next day. It is a Johnson 303 rifle. It will then be traced back within 24 hours of the assassination on November 23rd to a guy named Richard Hathcock in Los Angeles, who runs Allied Detective Agencies, who took, he doesn't run a pawn shop, but he took a friendly pawn from his buddy, Lauren Hall, who was in Los Angeles 5 days before the assassination and who had picked up the rifle about the 18th of September from him. So he pawns the rifle to this guy and he gets it back. And the FBI knew all about this rifle within 24 hours of the assassination because I got the documents on it. And so obviously I put Lauren Hall in the 6th floor where he's firing next to Lawrence Howard, who's the other shooter on the 6th floor. And I say that because of we have numerous witnesses who put a dark complected, possibly a Mexican or some described as a Negro on the 6th floor. You have the statements of Arnold Rowland and his wife. Arnold Rowland clearly says that this man had something wrong with his face, as though it was marked in some kind of way. Much like the descriptions of the husky Latino with the pockmarked face. This is 2 and 2 equals 4 all fucking day long. And the idea that this information's been out there for 50 fucking years and Kennedy researchers haven't been able to put 2 and 2 together on it really pisses me the fuck off that I had to spend 5 years of my fucking life doing it when somebody else could have done this and saved me some fucking time. But obviously it's Lawrence Howard and Lauren Hall on the 6th floor of the depository. The odd character out here being Sergio Arcacha on the roof, who I came up with by a process of elimination because I put Emilio Santana at the Daltex building underneath the fire escape where he fires 5 to 6 shots at Kennedy, but we'll get to him in a moment. So
was that the Enfield that was found on the roof, a British Enfield rifle?
No,
or a Mauser.
That was a Mauser 7.65 because the Enfield 303 will end up being picked up from Buell Fraser's house when Buell Fraser gets arrested.
Right, he had an Enfield. That's clearly when the police were trying to frame him up as a potential patsy on standby, and they threatened to give him the chair. We can get into that later.
Right. So, but we have William Seymour. After this, all this stuff happens, he re-enters the building at 12:33. He lets Lauren Hall know they got away, so he can make his exit from the building. He's then again seen by Richard Randolph Carr, who testifies before not only Clay Shaw's trial, but at the HSCA, that it's the same guy he saw on the 6th floor is now fleeing down Houston and Commerce and getting into this Green Nash Rambler. So we have 2 sightings of the Green Nash Rambler, both by Richard Randolph Carr. This will then be substantiated by Fred Robinson afterwards. But we're getting back to William Seymour re-entering the building. At this point, the power's back on. He takes the elevator back to the 6th floor. Why he does this, I'm not too sure. Maybe he plants the rifle. Maybe he makes some adjustments there. Maybe he should make sure he didn't leave any evidence. Who knows? But he does something on the 6th floor of the book depository. He then begins his descent down the stairs as he leaves his the elevator planted on the 6th floor, as it should have been if Oswald would have taken the stairs, which is the official story, right? So he leaves the elevator planted on the 6th floor. He begins his descent on the 6th floor, and he makes it to around the 4th floor, possibly the 3rd floor, when he is encountered by Officer Baker and Roy Truly. Roy Truly is the number 2 guy in charge of the book depository, clearly in on the setup of Lee Harvey Oswald. Because when the cops go to looking for Oswald, they go to the boarding house at 1026 North Beckley. But that's not the address that they had on file for him. The only address that they had on file for him was the address in Fort Worth at Ruth and Michael Payne's house on 5th Avenue. That's the only address that the book depository ever had. But somehow miraculously, they end up not only with the address to 1026 North Beckley, but the Elspeth boarding house address that Oswald never ended up staying at.
Yeah, because
really fucked up.
Wasn't the whole according to the official story, the way he even got the job was from Linnie Mae Randall, Fraser's sister, and then through Ruth Payne, right? They have to have it. So with that address.
Correct. And that whole thing there's shenanigans afoot. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
So you have William Seymour is then stopped either on the 4th or 3rd floor by Baker and Truly. And this brings us to the Oswald drinking a Coke 90 seconds after the assassination in the fucking lunchroom story, which never happened. This is a propaganda story. This story never occurred. It never occurred 90 seconds after the assassination. And Oswald sure as fuck was never seen drinking a Coke. Okay, the whole story is complete bullshit. Number one,
because Pepsi guy.
Well, Oswald was never in the fucking building, so it couldn't have been Oswald in the first place. He was certainly not drinking a Coke, and he was certainly not on the 2nd floor lunchroom. What you have here is a melding of stories. Remember, the last person to see him is Carolyn Walters, who sees him on the 2nd floor, right, between 12:15 and 12:25. And he's sitting at the booth.
Keep going, Cory. I'll be right back.
That is the last time that we have Oswald in the lunchroom. That is then combined with the story of Baker and Truly confronting, who is ultimately actually William Seymour, on the stairwell. And we know it's not Oswald because he's wearing the light brown jacket that William Seymour is captured wearing in the Robert Hughes film.
I got to step out for 1 second. Just keep going, Cory. I'll be right back.
So when he's captured in the Robert Hughes film, he's seen wearing a light brown jacket, and then he gets a signal from Detective Trantham. He then walks back into the front doors of the book depository and takes the elevator to the 6th floor. He is still wearing the light brown jacket when he is identified as Oswald in the stairs by Baker and Truly in the reports that are then written up. So this is ultimately important for so many reasons, because number one, we know Oswald allegedly was only wearing a white t-shirt, and he had to go to the 1026 North Beckley boarding house in order to get his tan jacket, which will then be found at the Texaco. However, this man, who is later identified by Baker and Truly as Oswald, he's confronted not on the 2nd floor, but in the stairwell, and he is wearing a light brown jacket. Baker is adamant about him wearing a light brown jacket in his testimony before the Warren Commission. David Bellin, the lawyer for the Warren Commission, attempts to get Officer Baker to describe the man he encountered as having worn the dark brown shirt that Oswald will later be wearing in the office of the police department. However, Baker does not ever say that. He will never give in to David Bellin, and he doesn't budge. And he's emphatic that the man he encountered is wearing a light brown jacket. Now, this did not occur 90 seconds after the assassination. This could not have occurred until a minimum 12:37 to 12:38 p.m. And this completely debunks the idea that anything happened on the 2nd floor 90 seconds after the assassination. And we know this thanks to the statements of Robert McNeil. Robert McNeil, who was a reporter for NBC, he ends up running up to the grassy knoll, and then he needs to make a phone call. So he runs back to the book depository, and he runs into the book depository to make a phone call. He ends up calling his New York news desk for NBC. And when he talks to the FBI, he gets his timestamp for that phone call. That phone call occurred at 12:36 p.m. And he clearly states in his statement to the Dallas police and the FBI that no police officers entered the building before him or until he had left. And we know that no cops could have entered in the first 3 minutes after the assassination because of the presence of Lauren Hall and William Seymour and ultimately William Shelley, Billy Lovelady, and Buell Frazier. All 5 of those guys would have been in the fucking building within the first 3 minutes. And so we know that no cops entered within the first 3 minutes. And that means that the entire story about Baker and Truly in the lunchroom with Oswald drinking a fucking Coke is mythology. And why did they have to come up with this story? They had to come up with this story for a very good reason. They needed to come up with the story to cover for the fact that there was another arrest made in Dealey Plaza directly in front of the book depository in the minutes after the assassination. And I believe that arrest was made by Baker himself after he got off his motorcycle, because when you look at the film by Malcolm Couch, you can tell that Baker does not run to the book depository like the official story says. He runs past the book depository door to Houston Street, and then we lose track of him there. And I'll tell you, this would completely coincide with Emilio Santana descending from beneath the fire escape at the Daltex building with a rifle. I believe that Baker saw this man descend from the fire escape, who then ran north on Houston Street. Baker then runs north on Houston Street. He apprehends this man, Emilio Santana, who was one of 2 anti-Castro Cubans involved in this thing. So I wish people would shut the fuck up about the anti-Castro Cubans who have nothing to do with this. Okay,
it's a little overblown, isn't it? The whole
overblown. It's misdirection, right? So he takes Emilio Santana into custody, and this is captured in the Willis 10 photograph. Google the Willis 10 photograph. They're taking a man into custody in front of the book depository who's dressed all in black. To me, this completely coincides with the statements made by Robert McNeil, who state nobody entered the building until at least 12:36 or 12:37. So from this, they had to come up with the story about 90 seconds after in the book depository to cover for the fact that there was an arrest that took place well beyond that 90-second threshold. There's no other possibility that could have occurred. So then what you have is Baker and Truly confronting William Seymour, who's wearing the light brown jacket, as was observed in the Robert Hughes film, on the stairs, either between the 3rd and 4th floor. And it had to have happened around 12:37 to 12:38, which makes perfect sense to me, because Truly will identify him as an employee, which tells us that Truly's in on it, because that's sure as fuck William Seymour, not Oswald. We know this in part because of the light brown jacket that he's wearing. So, but then he will be cut loose at around 12:38 or 12:39. It is then immediately after he descends down the stairs, exits the side of the book depository, that we have numerous witness statements in Dealey Plaza of, quote unquote, Oswald fleeing out the side of the building, down the grassy slope, and getting into a green Nash Rambler station wagon and driving away. So here we have the utmost in contradiction by Kennedy researchers who believe that Oswald can exist in 2 places simultaneously.
Well, because officially he was supposed to have gotten onto a bus or offered a cab to a woman, right? I mean, there's even discrepancies in that.
Correct. So basically, Oswald is alleged to have gotten on a bus. The bus would have been the Marsalis bus, driven by Cecil McWaters. And so Cecil McWaters allegedly, he tells the Warren Commission this big story about this guy on the bus and all this stuff. And then he recants his testimony and says, "Oh, I was mistaken. The testimony I gave you about this guy who I said was Oswald was actually a guy named Roy Milton Jones, who was like this little black kid who was fucking like in 10th or 11th grade." Right. So
everything about it is ridiculous, Corey. When anybody looks at this honestly, like looks at any part of this case, the whole thing falls apart.
The whole thing.
It's like a house of cards, man. It's why the media coverage is so insulting all the time, but in particular during the anniversaries that come out. And you got Rob Reiner's podcast where he's going to name the shooters. I think that's bullshit.
Who does he name? Does he name anybody?
He hasn't named him yet.
He hasn't named him yet.
And he's got Soledad. He's doing that with Soledad O'Brien, Corey.
Rob Reiner, I can give you a tip here. Rob Reiner, if you're listening, go buy my book and just steal the work. Okay, just steal it. Okay, and just name those people. And then I won't even sue you. Okay, just go do that, and I'll be happy that you got the real shooters out.
They're gonna put it in When Harry Met Sally Part 2. But sorry, I didn't mean to bring you off track.
But it's totally fine, because it's you made a great point. Is that like when you look at every single thing that they tell in the official story,
dude,
every incident falls apart, from Oswald being seen as he's walking out of the depository. Both of those witnesses fell the fuck apart, right? That's in my book. Then he allegedly gets on the bus, and those witnesses, they fucking fall apart because he never got on a bus. Nobody ever got on a bus. The bus story is completely staged.
Well,
and
then
I
you
didn't
could-
even I didn't
the
even
intelligence guy taking photos of the bus.
Right. I don't even think, did I even mention that in the book? I don't even think I mentioned that in the fucking book.
Maybe in one of your presentations you talked about that guy who was on his day off. He was like Army Intelligence. And
Army Intelligence on his day off, and he took pictures of both sides of that bus.
Fucking break.
Like, fuck you. Are we that stupid? No,
we do have some questions from the audience here, Cory. Let's get into some of those. And this one is one you hear, from time to time. I don't think it's true, but I want to get your thoughts on it. From Big John. I have a question. Was Woody Harrelson's father involved?
No.
That's Charles Harrison, right? He was supposedly a guy who was in jail and an assassin, right?
No, the tall tramp was Danny Green.
The Irishman.
The Irishman.
That was an interesting movie that came out with.
That's the other Irishman. There's two Irishmen, but there's also a movie on Danny Green. The other Irishman is Sheehan, right? Daniel, or what's his name?
Oh, I Paint Houses.
I Paint Houses. Yeah, I heard. Yeah, Houses, that guy. He's the one who delivered the rifles to fucking David Ferry. So
Mateo Costanero, aka Matthew Cook, one of the biggest trolls I've ever met in my life. I think he's down in Mexico. Do you even Cord Meyer anymore, or do you just Ryan Dawson? I think you can Cord Meyer.
That's mildly funny.
You can Cord Meyer and Ryan Dawson. I mean, Cord Meyer with his eyeball. Wasn't he missing an eyeball from World War II and the whole Mary's Mosaic and the diary? What do you think about all that?
I haven't got too far into it, but it kind of butts up against the Very Baker shit, and she's a fucking hack and a fraud. Yeah, fuck her.
Judith Very Baker? Yeah, she's a liar.
Okay, she said she called the depository and talked to Oswald. I'm like, that's when I knew she was totally fucking full of shit.
She may have worked at O'Reilly Coffee.
She did. No, that's confirmed.
Okay, so that's the only true part of her story.
Right, that's the nugget of truth. But like, she was probably fucking one of the 6 Oswald lookalikes down there, and who was like, "Yeah, I'm Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm a spy, baby."
It was just Kerry Thornley.
Hey, from what I can tell, Kerry Thornley was a player. He was banging like 6 chicks down there too. So, but here's the thing. She's full of shit because I've gone through every fucking document that mentions Kerry Thornley, Oswald, or New Orleans, and there isn't even a hint of some fucking hang around chick with any of them. None. Zero.
No. What girl's going to want to hang out with them? They were into boys. I mean,
except Kerry Thornley. Kerry Thornley seems to have he made a statement.
He was a stud. He's a stud.
He was a stud. He banged a bunch of chicks. He was fucking Jeannie Hack.
No, he died in like 99, 2000 out in California, right?
Yeah.
He was not even 60, or he was
young.
He was a couple years older than Oswald. Was born in 39, right? And Thornley was
born in 37, I think. But
so he was a couple years older than Oswald.
Yeah. But
now,
he still died young. He was like 59 or 60 when he died.
Was he connected to ONI or CIA? Like, where do you think?
Well, here's all these guys who were Marines or ONI first. This is how
naval intelligence.
I think you're ONI and they grab you and then they send you to the CIA for whatever reason. There's got to be a relationship there because you got to get Ryan Dawson on and ask him about his experience with Oswald's handler's son. Because
Dawson has talked to and met one of the not the Morgenscheld, the famous. The one that everyone knows about.
John Hurt, the final phone call from jail.
Oh, yes. No, I did. Yes, to the Carolinas. You got
to ask Ryan Dawson directly about that phone call.
I have talked to Dawson about that phone call, actually.
Did he tell you about, and he didn't mention his handler?
This was off the record.
You got to fucking get him on the show and ask him about this, because Ryan Dawson identified Oswald's handler. He personally knows Oswald's handler's son, and he fucking identified him 100% as naval intelligence over everything else. But he's the one to tell that story. He won't even give me the details on it. That's as much as he'll give me.
Look, this was the call. Like, obviously, Oswald was like, they have not given me legal representation, and there's a story of Mark Lane trying to get
it never connected. The call never got connected.
That's I was just going to say. So this is supposed to be the last call, and of course, whoever it was, whether it was the Secret Service or the FBI, whoever was listening in the next room, told the gal at the phone thing not to connect that call, but of course she wrote the details of it and it got thrown in the wastebasket, and then the next girl on the shift, whatever. But the fact that it was that guy, and
that guy was a cutout. A cutout is like a guy who makes the call to the guy, right? So you call the guy, and then the guy makes the call to the guy. So that's exactly what that was. And so Ryan knows the guy he was supposed to call.
Of course he does,
and he won't tell me.
Just like he knows Hillary's secrets, he's related to someone from Hillary's Secret Service.
Oh yeah.
Has he told you those stories?
His aunt. Yeah.
Yeah, we want to get Ryan on soon to do an Epstein update. My brother did a great episode on Epstein with Ryan a couple years ago. It's one of our most popular streams on here. And but I mean, the Kennedy stuff is, the connections are crazy. So back to Oswald, though. So, like, sometimes when people are asking me, like, I mean, do you think Oswald was involved in all? And I say, no, I don't think the Oswald that we see who was arrested at the Texas Theater, who was at the Dallas police station doing the midnight press conference. That guy, look at him. He looks beat up. He looks disheveled. He looks scared. He looks completely shellacked. That guy didn't shoot anybody. He didn't shoot J.D. Tippit. He didn't shoot Kennedy.
Well, that guy sat in the fucking movie theater for over 30 minutes eating popcorn. If he was nervous or thought anything was going on, he'd have been in the wind. He wouldn't have been out there.
I want to get to the Texas movie theater, but I mean, just that guy doing that press conference when he's informed that, you have been charged. He looks genuinely shocked. But that also doesn't mean that guy Oswald was not some kind of low-level intelligence informant or thinking he was doing work on behalf of American intelligence trying to disrupt some kind of plot.
He was clearly intelligence.
It was something. I mean, he was...
First of all, you don't get bounced around the amount that he gets bounced around, and you don't go to Russia on a false defector program. Oswald was part of the AE Balcony program or the Redskin program. One of those two, because they were both kind of interchangeable by 62 when they came to an end. So you have the Redskin program, which had been in place since 55, which was 100% about getting students who were originally naturalized, who had spoken fluent Russian, to go back to Lithuania, Estonia, these countries. They spoke fluent Russian. They could blend in. They would go back on a student visa, but they would kind of pretend to be Russians, and they would go and recruit people, right? And so that program was the umbrella program. But eventually you had the AE Balcony program, which was designed to using naturalized citizens to go over there and do the same thing, but minus the student aspect, right? And so that was
program, a legit way. That was a legit way of getting someone into Russia.
They would have them go back there. They would have them get like a real visa or a travel visa, whereas Redskin would be a student visa, right? And so, but what did Oswald do? He got a fucking visa to go to Helsinki, right? To go to the fucking Albert Schweitzer School.
Finland.
Right. And so Albert Schweitzer School, that was being run by Percival Brundage, who was a former CIA guy or current CIA guy at the time, because there's no such thing as former CIA, right? So the whole thing was a CIA setup from the beginning, right?
Where did he run into Patricia McMillan? Was that in Minsk or Moscow or?
I never followed the McMillan stuff too much. She seemed like a CIA cutout the whole time.
She totally is. Yeah, so. She just died a couple years ago. She had a nice life, man, towing that line for the many decades that she did. It afforded her a very nice life.
Yeah, for sure. Same with like what's her name, Goodwin, and her husband. You know what I'm talking about? The fucking historians who do all the presidential books.
Oh, Lisa McClellan and Clint Hill, or
no. The ones that were on MSNBC. I forget her name. I'll get it for you after the show.
I'm not sure. Yeah, off the top of my head.
He goes to he goes there under a false defector program. But the Soviets have to be in on it, because when he goes to Minsk, he goes to work in a factory, and he's making more money in the factory than the fucking guy running the factory.
The radio factory, right? Yeah. In Minsk, the photo of him on the couch with the shades.
Yeah, that's it. Dorothy Kearns Goodwin. That's the one I'm thinking of. So it makes no fucking sense. Nothing about his trip to the Soviet Union makes any sense. Him coming back with the Russian bride doesn't make any sense, except for the Russians saying, "Ha ha, fuck you."
Wasn't she the daughter of a Russian general?
Niece or something like that.
She was connected to some kind of.
Yeah. But there's no way that he's getting out, or much less her getting out, without there being a intelligence connection there. And so that whole story is ridiculous. But obviously she gets back, and then we have the evidence that she forged his name on the Selective Service card. It was her handwriting on the back of the Hunter of Fascists on the photograph. And that automatically links her with George de Mohrenschildt and the Paynes as having been on this, who said that the rifle was in the fucking garage. I mean, like, so we can pretty much lump all of those fucks into like one category as having completely been in on this. And that's when I started to link Kerry Thornley to Marina, because you start seeing incidents of Oswald driving a car, and Oswald doesn't drive a fucking car.
He didn't have his license. He couldn't drive.
Yeah. I think he didn't have a license because Kerry Thornley had his license in Texas. So
he had Oswald's license, his ID.
Yeah. That's what I think, because there was numerous incidents where a man presented Lee Harvey Oswald's driver's license, like at the Jiffy store the morning of the assassination, where he bought pickle brittle and beer. He presented Oswald's ID that morning. It was clearly Kerry Thornley. So obviously Kerry Thornley had a driver's license with Oswald's name. Hence, Oswald never tried to get a driver's license because he was told, don't get a driver's license because you already got one out there. Right? So that's the only thing that makes any fucking sense.
We'll give you one. We'll call it AJ Heidel. We'll give you a Heidel license in the wallet for that they found at the Tippett scene that they presented. There's even footage of it at the Tippett scene. There's like screenshots of it, of a wallet.
Right. But then it mysteriously disappears. The wallet mysteriously disappears, but yet the AJ Heidel fucking ID ends up with his property, which makes no sense at all. It was obviously planted there by Westbrook, who brought Kerry Thornley there to the Tippett shooting. So if you want to get into Texas theater and stuff, we can cover that real quick. But that's totally linked to the Tippett shooting. So you have to kind of cover both. And so
before we do though, you mentioned Tippett going. I think you mentioned Oswald going in to buy beer and peanut brittle. Right. Tippett also not in that same place? Or is this the record store where supposedly Oswald and Tippett were both in, but it may have been Thornley or Seymour?
It was Thornley for sure. So
because Oswald was supposed to be either on his way to work or at work.
Right. So the way I see it, Seymour was at the building that day, not Oswald. And Oswald was still in Fort Worth. He didn't do shit that morning until he got a ride to the Texas Theater in a cab. And so
all right. So Cory, going into the Texas Theater, and I've kind of always thought this too, and I think you've mentioned this in your research. A lot of the police, the Dallas police, a lot of them would moonlight. They do private security. There were John Birchers. Some of them may have been part of the Klan. There was a huge racist streak down there. A lot of them not fans of Kennedy. So Kennedy being shot, not a federal crime at that point to assassinate a president. A lot of them are going to not be lackadaisical, but maybe not be too upset about it. You shoot a Dallas police officer, forget about it.
Yeah,
you have the whole squad coming after you. So the Texas Theater.
That's my thesis on Tippett. That's purely my thesis.
That hullabaloo.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go from like Tippett to the Texas Theater. Bring us through.
All right. So, what time is it? Do you got a time limit? I don't have a time limit.
No, we can. Yeah.
Right. Can I smoke some weed on your show?
Hey, man, you can do whatever you want. Right. If you want to just take why don't we take a little break? We'll do a little intermission.
We can take like 5 minutes. Yeah, that's
okay.
Good.
Folks, send in your super chat, send in your questions. We're almost at the hour mark of Jackman Radio, and Cory and I will be right back. JC, yes, please stand by. Thank you, JC. It's great to see you guys too, and we did take a little bit of a break. You know, our last guest was Vivek Ramaswamy. We wanted to come back hot with some JFK fire, so we got Cory Hughes in the house tonight. JC, no question, just good to see you. Hey, it's great to see you too, man. And let me tell you, 2024 is going to be a great year for Jackman Radio podcast. We're going to continue to cover the Kennedy assassination. We'll talk about the RFK assassination, 9/11, Epstein, all the stuff that you love us for. And to our listening audience, we are joined by Cory Hughes, and we're back from a little intermission. It's a lot of information to get through. So, Cory, I think we were talking about the kind of the Tippett shooting to the Texas Theater. And really, that's where the Oswald that we know and love was taken into custody in the Texas Theater.
So it's kind of hard to know where to start, but for me, the story of the Tippett shooting and the Texas Theater begins on the grassy knoll. And that's because of the presence of one man named David Ferry. And so David Ferry is one of two shooters on the grassy knoll, the other shooter being Jack Valenti. So David Ferry is one of two shooters on the grassy knoll. From there, he's seen behind the book depository in a gray Plymouth by a woman named Velma, who was also the witness who sees Lauren Hall flee from the back of the building with the Johnson 30-06 rifle. So,
and you think you know who Velma is because of her husband?
Possibly. It's a suspicion. I mean, it's a weird coincidence, and it's an unusual name. So, and it would make sense for Bill Dalzell to have been in fucking Dealey Plaza if the rest of the guys were there. So yeah, it makes sense. But I don't know for sure. I can't say that with 100% certainty, you know. Okay. But it's my suspicion that Velma is Velma Dalzell, who was Bill Dalzell's wife at the time of the assassination. But Bill Dalzell is one of those guys who didn't have to be in Dallas. But see, Clay Shaw is one of those guys who didn't have to be in Dallas. They all went there because they had to see. They had to watch. It was a...
they wanted to see it happen?
They had to. I mean,
that's so sick.
Compulsion. They had to be there. So...
yeah, in the end of your book, one of the things you call the JFK assassination is a snuff film, and I've always thought that too. The Zapruder film is the ultimate snuff film. I mean, and any of the films of it, but
yeah,
this is a man being murdered, having his head blown off, and it's still just as shocking now, 60 years ago, as it was when America first was able to see this Zapruder film in 1975.
Right. So David Ferry, he's seen behind the book depository in this gray Plymouth. The gray Plymouth is an older 1950s single seat. It's very significant because ultimately that gray Plymouth will end up belonging to a CIA agent named Carl Mather, who works for Collins Radio. Collins Radio installed the radio networks on Air Force 1 and 2.
Now, didn't Marina's next husband, Porter, work for Collins Radio too, right?
Not surprising. I didn't know that, but not surprising. It's one of these companies in the loop in Dallas. So
you know how her name was Porter? She married a guy named Porter afterwards.
Porter, and there's another guy.
I'm pretty damn sure he worked for Collins Radio, Corey.
Yeah, there's a Porter, and there's another guy named John Martin who pop up immediately. The assassination happens, and boom, these two dudes are in her life like overnight. So I haven't dug into them yet.
I mean, she's a babe too. Like she was
back then, she was looking good. She was looking good.
She was that Red Sparrow babe, dude.
Look at any photograph of her. Her eyes give her away, though. In every photograph, her eyes just scream, "I'm lying."
Imagine Oswald's poor daughters, though, man. My heart breaks for them too. You know, they haven't given any interviews. Yes, they haven't given any interviews since either the late '80s or early '90s, around the 30th anniversary, and it's just heartbreaking. One of them looks a lot like Oswald, so I have no reason to doubt that they're his daughters. But one of them, I think, moved kind of out the western part of the U.S., and they've led as normal life as possible. But I mean, you can find interviews of them. It's from like Inside Edition or something like that, one of those kind of entertainment rags from the '90s. But
I don't see them knowing much unless Marina told them stuff. That's the only thing I could think of.
They came out in that era proclaiming his innocence with Marina. And Marina, of course, gave interviews to one of the later episodes of The Men Who Killed Kennedy, proclaiming his innocence, which I thought was weird. But since then, she hasn't participated in anything really. And she still lives in Texas, as far as I know. And you can hear her in Good's documentary about Ruth Payne saying, "Don't get into this. This is just going to be a waste of your life." You know, and then she's also met up with Jesse Ventura like a decade ago for a show Conspiracy Theory off camera, but with audio. And that's about it. So,
but yeah, so, David Ferry, and the thing that really clinched it for me being David Ferry, besides you have a series of descriptions starting with Ed Hoffman on the grassy knoll leading to Velma behind the book depository in the gray Plymouth, and then the gray Plymouth and a similarly described man wearing a black felt hat with a wide band and a dark blue suit. And Velma described him clearly as having real heavy eyebrows. And that is what lynched it for me, really. I mean, once you realize that all the descriptions are of David Ferry, and then I find a picture of David Ferry wearing the same suit that he's wearing in the pictures captured in the railroad yards behind the book depository. So it's like unbelievable. Once it hit me, it was David Ferry. Everything fell into place. All his alibi stuff for the Winterland started to fall into place. And it was like everything started to fall into place once you come to realize that David Ferry's in Dallas. Until you realize David Ferry's in Dallas, none of the fucking assassinations ever going to make any goddamn sense. Then once you realize that all of the witnesses who saw people like Lawrence Howard on the 6th floor with the marks on his face, you know, and all that stuff, it all starts to click. And you're like, holy shit, it's all based around New Orleans. With the exception of the handful of shooters. I don't want to talk about this today, but there are a handful of shooters who were brought in by the other mob bosses.
The Chicago outfit?
Chicago outfit all day. They brought in Cleveland because Cleveland was under control of Chicago, particularly Danny Green, the tall tramp, who then obviously gets arrested with the old tramp, who is Leo Mosseri.
That's not Chauncey Holt?
Fuck no. Now, I do believe Chauncey Holt was in Dealey Plaza. He made some statements to me that were... He made statements about things that he didn't understand that I do understand. Right. He made a statement. Well, okay, so he said he drove in that day with Nicoletti, which here's the thing. I don't have any other evidence of Nicoletti being there, and Nicoletti murdered a guy named Foreman a week before the assassination, so I don't see Nicoletti having gone to Dallas. If he were ever captured in a photograph or anything in Dallas, the gig would have been up, and it would have been all about, they would have known that a Chicago outfit had been involved. I don't see such a prominent guy who was on the lam in the first place having been in Dallas. But fuck, these guys were so arrogant and everyone had to be there, so you never know. He said that two guys were there that he drove in from Pete Licavoli's ranch, which was down in Tucson. And he said that he drove in with Nicoletti and that he drove in with Leo Mosseri. Leo Mosseri is the old tramp. Sure as shit. He was Danny Green's I'm assuming, point of contact in the Cleveland mob at the time. You see, at the time, Danny Green was the head of the Longshoremen Union, and the longshoreman at the time was controlled by the mob. Like, it's just
Right.
common knowledge. So you don't get to be the head of the longshoreman without the assistance of the mob. And then when I realized that Danny Green had been a sniper trainer in the Marine Corps, that was kind of like, oh, that's what he was doing there. That's why he was the tall tramp, right? So did he shoot? I don't know. But he was there, and he was a sniper trainer in the Marines. 2 + 2 = 4. I can't put a rifle in his hand, so I can't really say with certainty. I got 2 or 3 guys like Robert Bernard Baker. Robert Bernard Baker is clearly the fat guy on the overpass in the white shirt. That you can put together when you start to put together the fact that Dave Yaris and Lenny Patrick were there, and that Dave Yaris was one of the shooters, and that Dave Yaris was the shooter between the pergola and the fence. And that you can kind of start to reverse engineer through a number of different factors. But
he was a lot older by then, though, right? In his 60s.
Yeah,
I mean, he had been involved in stuff going back World War II era, right?
Yes. Way before that, he was the guy who organized the assassination of Anton Cermak in 33. So yeah, the guy was 19 years old at the time, fucking, dropping fucking bodies for fucking the mob at 19 years old in Miami. Like, basically, he went to Miami for Chicago. He grew up in Chicago with Jack Ruby and Lenny Patrick, who were his 2 best friends. A couple other guys who got whacked back in the day. They were a Jewish mob, a Jewish gang, but they were kind of doing work for Al Capone.
Is it true that Richard Nixon recognized Ruby and said, "I knew him from before"? Have you heard that one?
The documents came out because Ruby was an investigator for Nixon in the Kefauver hearings. So that's fact. Yeah.
Okay.
That was discovered by Doug Valentine.
Got a comment here from Mateo. This is like the Israel did it version of everything is a rich man's trick.
Everything's a rich man's trick is bullshit CIA propaganda. No one should ever watch that fucking movie. It's dog shit.
Yeah, it's very silly. Thank you, Mateo. Yeah, I'm sorry. Back to Ferry. There's a lot of threads. So,
Ferry, you can trace once you, and then there's even more proof in which we'll get to after he leaves fucking Dallas, because you can trace Ferry's movements to Dallas. So after they're involved in the Tippit shooting, which we'll get to here momentarily, he then flees to Hammond, Louisiana, where he hides out for the weekend. But so after he leaves the behind the grassy knoll and behind the depository, he's in the Gray Plymouth, which is owned by Carl Mathers. That license plates, Carl Mathers, will later show up on a red Ford Falcon driven by Kerry Thornley. Maybe we'll have time to get to that. But,
that's crazy. And I'm glad someone had the wherewithal to write down the plate tags.
Yeah, totally. So basically you get David Ferry is over at Tippit's place. And what happens with Tippit is Tippit behind the book depository tells him, "I told you move that car." So from there, Tippit heads over to the Gloco station on North Zang Boulevard. And then he sits there for like 15 minutes. He's obviously waiting for someone to get off the bus. Nobody gets off the bus. When no one gets off the bus, he panics because obviously he was supposed to intercept somebody. He goes to the Top 10 record store. He makes a phone call. The phone call goes unanswered. He leaves there in a panic. He starts pulling people over, looking for someone in the back seat. He then ends up at the 404 East 10th Street, which is the address at which the alley was where he parked in front of. And so he's parked there. And so the person who was staying at the boarding houses, there's a direct connection between the person staying there and the Tippit shooting, right? And so you have to see that connection in order to put the dots together on Kerry Thornley. But ultimately, it's Kerry Thornley staying at the boarding house. And this becomes apparent because of the relationship with him and the other man on scene at the Tippit shooting, which is David Ferry. And when that kind of reinforces everything that went on with Perry Russo at the party and the relationship between Ferry and Kerry Thornley, and brings everything back to New Orleans, right? So you have New Orleans all over the book depository. You have New Orleans all over the sightings of Oswald with William Seymour and Lawrence Howard everywhere in Dallas. And then you have everything going on with Kerry Thornley and Marina, which brings everything back to New Orleans. And when you realize that, holy shit, really everything was about New Orleans, because for many years I thought that was bullshit. I thought that was the smokescreen. It wasn't. It was not the smokescreen. It was legit. And ultimately, the assassination trickled down from David Ben-Gurion to the Mossad to who would be the roving ambassadors in America, which are Menachem Begin, Yitzhak Rabin, Yitzhak Shamir, who were then coordinating through, obviously, the Los Angeles mob through Mickey Cohen and Bugsy Siegel. And then you have the connection in New York City between Meyer Lansky directly and David Ben-Gurion, all the way going back to 1946, right? So you have these established relationships.
Who was it that was working Ruby? That gave Ruby because Ruby gets off the phone after a phone call, and witnesses say it looked like his blood. That was a guy back in L.A. that he was meeting with, right? Before
he called Al Gruber, and Al Gruber was the right hand man of Mickey Cohen, and Al Gruber had come visited him 3 weeks before the assassination. So the way I interpret these series of events is The Israelis, because Mickey Cohen's in jail at this time. But remember, when you go back and you read Mr. Hollywood, the book on Mickey Cohen about his life in L.A., holy shit, that book is almost completely about his relationship with the Israelis. And like when you come to learn that Menachem Begin was his personal rabbi going back to 1949. So here we are in 1963. You got almost 15, 16 years, whatever, of the fucking relationship going on between the Israelis, who were pre-Israeli Zionists back in 1946 when they first sent people to go meet with Bugsy Siegel, right? So the first interaction between the Israelis goes back to 46. And Reuven Daphne, an emissary of the Haganah, meets with Bugsy Siegel, right? And then that's in 46. Then the following year, you have the relationship begins between David Ben-Gurion and Meyer Lansky in New York. And then you have Mickey Cohen and Menachem Begin by 49. So you have like this, like the biggest guys in the fucking mafia in America and the biggest names in the Zionist movement in Israel and then the Israeli government. By 63, they're like best friends. They've been together 15 fucking years already. This is what brings in Ryan's work on NUMEC, right? This is the intersection for NUMEC and all that shit that he talks about, and that map he goes over, and all those fucking Jews, right? All that shit. My work butts up to the beginning of that, and like then you have jumped to his work for all the NUMEC stuff, and then it comes back in 63 for the assassination, right? So that work that Ryan fucking did on NUMEC is priceless, and I didn't do any of that work either. Like he did all that stuff. I never got to any of that stuff. He basically beat me to it.
So NUMEC, for our listening audience, is Ryan Dawson's documentary on ancreport.com on how Israel stole the bomb.
Right.
And
so my work covers
fascinating.
My work covers from 46, which this will all be in my next book. All the Jew stuff will be in my next book. But like from 46 with these relationships going on in LA, which is super important because that phone call to Al Gruber, right? Al Gruber is the guy who's the right-hand man of Mickey Cohen in LA, who's already 15 years beholden to the Israelis, right? So what that tells me is the Israelis sent fucking Al Gruber to go meet with Jack Ruby 3 weeks before the assassination. And when Oswald did not get killed and he was arrested when he should have died in the theater,
right.
Jack Ruby calls Al Gruber for guidance. What do we do now? And that is when Al Gruber gives Jack Ruby the order to kill Oswald.
Was Ruby also not given the $50,000 shortly before the assassination and had a safe at his club? He had help outfitting a safe by a member of the Dallas Police Department. Yeah,
but to me, all that stuff is like incidental, like fucking noise. Don't get caught up in the details because he had such money flowing through him at all times for gun running and all kinds of shit. Who can say what the $50,000 was for? So who the fuck knows, right? So
and some of your research too, Cory, points to the fact that Ruby may have in fact known or had cancer as early as 1963 or earlier. So he dies from cancer in 1967, which I think is what happened. This whole thing about how somebody injected him with cancer. I don't know that I buy that.
Stupid. It's ridiculous.
Now look,
you don't need to go off the deep end.
He was visited by an MK Ultra mind control doctor, Jolly West. That's a very important nugget that was dug up in the book Chaos by O'Neill. But he may have already had cancer as far back as 1963 or earlier, so he was already pretty much a dead man. He was a dead man.
He had told other people as far back as like 55 that he had cancer. Wow. So like back then, they didn't know cancer. They didn't know how to fucking cure cancer back then, and so like they didn't know anything about cancer really.
And the debunkers like to use I think it's with the Western Union money order and all that, leaving his dog in the car. That's all bullshit.
Yeah, because he didn't buy the fucking money order. That guy was in the fucking building for over 2 hours that morning. He was obviously let in by George Butler.
He was already there. Yeah.
Right. So who bought the money order? Obviously, it was his brother.
His brother, yeah. Obviously, who's not missing his finger.
Right. So that, to me, is one of the biggest things because you have how many times is Jack Ruby caught on camera that week? Oh, in like a 24-hour period. He's on film like four times.
He's in the hallway when they're trading out the rifle. He's at the midnight press conference.
Why would he do that?
Yeah.
To establish an alibi. Because he wasn't fucking there. Because he was in Galveston the whole goddamn weekend. I'm still working out the details of what he did, but I can tell you with certainty he was in Galveston that Sunday or that Saturday because he was seen at a fucking sporting goods store where he either bought or sold a gun. Some teenager had called the FBI, reported this. I have the documents on this, so he was definitely there.
Who's the informant that he said, are you hanging around for the fireworks? Because that
was a guy named Vanderslice.
Yeah. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's legit. Because Vanderslice was going to go meet with the FBI, and then on his way to going to meet with the FBI, he got someone that showed up and beat his ass and then the FBI never heard from him again. So that's what the documents tell us. So he was on his way to an appointment. He never made the appointment, and then he phoned him and said that he got his ass beat, and then he talked to him eventually and never showed up. So yeah, 100% believable story. And it's obvious that who was the person inside the Dallas Morning News?
His brother
Samuel. And nobody ever talks about Samuel.
Dude, I'll be honest. I didn't even really know about him until I saw your research. I got a twin brother, Cory, and we could use spy tradecraft. We fool people unintentionally half the time when they.
I just watched the movie Dead Ringer recently, which was that creepy horror movie from the 80s where the two twins growing up.
Peter Jackson,
Jeremy Irons. He might have.
Oh, I never saw that. But I mean, we unintentionally fool people. So could you imagine presenting ID back in 1962, 63 of someone else's name and someone who vaguely looks like somebody with no CCTV, no photography, no social media, none of that shit? Dude, I could totally see how you can use that tradecraft to get away with it and have multiple people using one alias or identification at different places. It makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
But it happens with like 3 or 4 different people in this damn thing, right? It happens with Oswald, with Thornley and Seymour. It happens with Jack Ruby and his brother Samuel. It happens with David Ferry at the Winterland because he's impersonated by Sergio Arcacha. Where else is there? I'm sure there's another one in there somewhere, right? So you got impersonations happening all the fuck over the place. Using body doubles, and this is just typical tradecraft.
Thornley showing up at the printing place where the Fair Play for Cuba.
Right.
That's so much of the official story hinges on that of Oswald handing out those flyers.
Have you ever heard the name Kerry Thornley in anything official story ever once?
No,
not once.
I didn't even know who Kerry Thornley was until I started looking at your stuff. But it makes complete sense.
Yeah. So getting back to Tippett. So basically what you have is you have Westbrook and Croy. They go to the boarding house where Kerry Thornley's staying, not Oswald, and they pick him up and they drive him to 404. Well, it's the address. It's the alley between 404 and 410 East 10th Street, right? And so they pull up in the alley. Tippett's already there. Kerry Thornley gets out, and at this point, Tippett has already seen Kerry Thornley at least 3 times in the past 3 days. He's seen him that morning at the Top 10 record store. He's seen him the day before at Austin's barbecue, and he's seen him a couple days before that at the fucking diner. So if he does not know this person, if he's not introduced to this person, and he sees him at a point of contact where he's supposed to meet his other spook friends, I would be scared as shit. And he probably was scared shit too. He gets out of his car with his gun, and that's when Kerry Thornley shoots him 3 times in the chest. David Ferry is also on scene, comes up and shoots him once in the head. So from here, David Ferry flees in the gray Plymouth, which is owned by Carl Mather. From my calculation, he heads to an address on Belmont in Fort Worth where he switches vehicles and picks up a light blue Ford Falcon station wagon, which is an identical vehicle to his light blue Mercury Comet, but different branding. Same manufacturer, different branding, more tradecraft. So he leaves in the Ford Falcon. He drives from there to Hammond, Louisiana. Now back to Kerry Thornley. Kerry Thornley shot Tippett, right? And then from there, he dips to what I believe is a secondhand junk shop on Jefferson, where he is seen by a woman named Dorothea Dean. He tries to get into this junk shop. He can't get into the junk shop. It's locked. He's panicking. He's wearing this tan jacket that he picked up at the boarding house. As he makes it down the stairs, he takes off his jacket and he throws it not into the parking lot of the Texaco, but into a tire rack behind the Texaco. This is significant because Mrs. Dean, who will later tell this to her children, she dies, and then her children go present this information to Dale Myers, who is a fucking total hack wannabe of a researcher.
He's a debunker. He's a debunker,
yeah. And so I love how he gets his own research, and then he tries to debunk his own research. He does it numerous times with numerous people involved.
It's some pretty good research, though, but he doesn't know the implications of it.
It's obvious he tries to interpret everything through the lens of Oswald did this.
Like Gerald Posner. Do you think Gerald Posner's had some plastic surgery? He looks like it.
Oh, probably, but he works for the CIA. Like you know that because when he wrote his book on the Holocaust, he ended up contacting children of fucking ex-Nazis who nobody knew where they were except for the CIA and had their new undercover addresses. But somehow
they were paperclipped. Those were all paperclip folks. Infowars.com.
That was actually pretty good.
Cory, they were paperclipped. They were totally paperclipped.
Those like anybody who thinks that Oswald had anything to do with the assassination is so full of goddamn hubris and arrogant, and it's so funny because they're so stupid they never took any time to research any documents because it's so easily debunkable.
It's funny, Cory. So I've been to Dealey Plaza twice, and I did actually go do the tour I went into the 6th floor museum in 2019 for the tour, and did the whole thing. Put the headphones on, looked at everything. It was in there for several hours. It was actually coming down the lift or elevator that they have now, which is more towards the back of the building, and it was me and like 4 other people, and it was kind of quiet. And I just said, "So who here still thinks that Oswald did it?" And everybody in the fucking elevator raised their hands. So.
How do you get across to those people that Oswald didn't even work in that fucking building?
Like, well, I don't know.
When I look at the evidence, and people are like, "Well, what evidence do you have?" And I'm like, "Well, what evidence do you have?" Like,
you have what the television told you.
There's nothing that shows me he was ever there that day. And even when they asked him on the news film, they didn't ask him what they asked him was, "Were you in that building?" And his answer was, "Naturally, if I work in that building."
Mm-hmm.
That's a spy answer. That's not a yes or a fucking no. That's a spy answer for a guy who wasn't in that fucking building.
Naturally, that's right. And he's like, well, because I went to the Soviet Union. And he's like, naturally, if I work in that building, yeah, he's
right.
Like,
right. It's a fucking spy answer because he wasn't in that fucking building because he was in Fort Worth all morning until he got driven to the theater by a guy named Bo Click, who's related to Bernice Click, who's an associated fucking Jack Ruby. And so I don't want to get into any of that today, but we'll continue back to the Tippett shooting.
Well,
so
then to the theater, sitting down next to the pregnant lady with the dollar,
right.
the ripped dollar bill.
The dollar bill stuff might be bullshit. I have to do some more looking into that, but we'll get to that here in a moment. So
yeah.
Kerry Thornley basically dips from this fucking place and he goes to the Abundant Life Temple and he hides out there. This is another one of these CIA fronts. It's incorporated by a couple Joe Schmoes who are not fucking religious. They're not fucking preachers. I don't know why they incorporated a big building like that as a church or a temple, a Jewish temple, actually. One of the guys actually worked as a full-time driver for Continental Trailways, which is weird because one of the guys who was living at the boarding house, Kenneth Cody, was also a full-time driver for Continental Trailways. And he was the uncle of Joe Cody, one of the guys who helped Ferry by flying his plane back to Shreveport the night of the assassination, right? So there's this weird, intricate web of people all connected to all these things involved in the assassination. It's really kind of strange, but ultimately he will hide out there until approximately 12:36 p.m. But all this time, Oswald's already been in the book depository. See, Oswald is dropped off at the theater at approximately between 1 o'clock and 1:06 or 1:07, as per Butch Burroughs, who is the manager of the theater. So from what I can tell, he gets there. He buys a ticket from Julia Postal, who's sitting in the box office. He then goes in and gives his ticket to Butch Burroughs, who will attest to this years later in interviews done with researchers, not with the FBI. But he takes his ticket, and then Oswald goes into the theater, and he sits in front of a guy named Jack Davis. Jack Davis is an 18-year-old kid. This is a 900-seat theater. There's only 22 people in the theater, and he gets up, and then he sits next to Jack Davis, and Jack Davis is like, why the fuck is this guy sitting next to me? There's all these empty seats, and he's coming to sit next to me. And a couple minutes later, he gets up, and he does it again to somebody else, and he does this 2 or 3 times, sits next to a person, like he waits for a signal or something. They're sitting directly next to them. Eventually, he ends up next to a pregnant woman. He and the pregnant woman speak for several minutes. He and the pregnant woman then get up and go to the lobby. The pregnant woman then leaves. There was some potential scuttlebutt over him having a half of a ripped dollar in his possession when he's arrested. And so it was some assumption, it was some speculation that perhaps the woman had to have other half of the dollar, and if they had the match, then that was how you knew who your contact was. We know for a fact the CIA did this. I have the documents on the CIA documenting that they did this. However, there is some scuttlebutt over the reality of whether there was a half a dollar inside of Oswald's property or whether that was fake after the fact. I never went back to re-up on that stuff, so I'm not sure if that actually happened.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, but we do know that the CIA was doing that stuff, so I wouldn't put it past them. But honestly, it doesn't matter because we know enough about him moving around through the theater, talking to people, and then sitting down next to this pregnant woman to know that he's a spy and he was meeting with a contact. And I think I potentially have identified, or I might have identified this pregnant woman through a contact of Kerry Thornley's in New Orleans, because in Kerry Thornley's goddamn 50-page confession to Jim Garrison, I found where he references a woman. Then later on in his testimony before the Clay Shaw grand jury, he then mentions this woman again and her pregnancy. And so I think I might have put 2 and 2 together on who this pregnant woman meeting with Oswald could have potentially been. And if I'm right, it's a connection through Thornley in New Orleans. So, because I've been looking for pregnant woman, I've found 4 pregnant women in the story so far. Last time I did a video, it was 2. Now I'm up to 4.
I think Thornley's son is still alive. He had one son, and I think he's still alive.
Yeah, Craig.
Have you ever tried to reach out to him, or?
No, or did I? I don't remember. I located him. He was working at some business in Tampa. I don't recall if I reached out to him. I'm not the kind of guy to do reaching out. I don't like bothering people, you know.
I can understand that. Yeah,
So I don't know if
especially people.
we were talking about it before the show, but William Seymour is still alive in fucking, I think in Houston, or either Houston or Phoenix, one of the two. But he's still alive, and we're looking for someone to go talk to this motherfucker because I ain't gonna do it. So
Let's bring him on the podcast. Let's get him to StreamYard and have him come and
Well, I'll get you his data. Let's see if we can't do something with it. So,
I'd have Ghislaine Maxwell on if she wanted to come on. Like there is one woman who has access to Ghislaine in prison, and they've done interviews. Like
interesting. That's
interesting. So I don't know, but anyway.
So basically, what you have is Oswald gets to the theater. He buys a ticket. He goes in. He starts sitting next to all these people, and he meets with his contact, who's the pregnant woman, who then leaves. He then goes and buys popcorn from Butch Burroughs at 1:15 p.m. and goes back to his seat and sits there for more than 30 minutes eating popcorn, watching the movie. Okay, so what does that tell you? It tells you, number one, he didn't know anything was up. He didn't know anything was wrong. He didn't know anything was afoot at all. He definitely didn't know that anybody was going to come raiding in this theater, because if he thought people were going to come arrest him in the theater, he would have gotten the hell out of Dodge. He had no suspicions when his contact left the theater that anything was wrong. So he was obviously not nervous or anything. No one in the theater said he was anything about him being nervous or anything like that. So basically what we then have is, after he's in there, sitting there eating his popcorn, we have Kerry Thornley, who then makes his way past Hardy's shoe store, where inside Hardy's shoe store are three men: Johnny Brewer, who is the face of this story, as we shall see moving forward, and two other men. One guy named Tommy Rowe, who was a friend of Jack Ruby, who is so close to Jack Ruby, he ends up going and moving into Jack Ruby's apartment when Jack goes to jail on that Sunday. And then you have
wasn't Larry Crawford living with Ruby? Or
Larry Crawford was kind of squatting around different places, staying at the YMCA and different places. He was just kind of squatting. He stayed in the back room of the carousel, so he just kind of squatted around. But he ends up dipping out of town on the 22nd.
Oh yeah, he got out of Dodge quick.
And he goes to work. What does he go to do? He goes to Detroit, where he worked in a washateria. Who owned a washateria in Detroit in 1963? Earl Ruby, Jack's other brother. So
really,
yeah. So did he work for Jack's other brother? I can't say that with certainty, but it's a hell of a fucking coincidence.
Like you say in history, what is it?
There are no coincidences in history.
There are no coincidences. It's a study of relationships.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Right? What Fred Litwin would call propinquity, or whatever that fucking word is. Fred Litwin, who's a total douchebag, Zionist scumbag, wrote a whole book, like trying to debunk Garrison's work and saying that there was a lone gunman and shit like that. And like he uses this word, propinquity, I forget what fucking word it is, but it's like the most important fucking word that like any detective in the universe would know, that it's a study of what he really means is relationships. Right.
Look, just the fact that Garrison had Ferry in for questioning like that Monday or Tuesday after the assassination, doesn't that say it all? And you can just go from there. You can just kind of go from there. Yes.
And so ultimately, the person who the official story says is Oswald entering the theater at 1:36 is actually Kerry Thornley, right? And Kerry Thornley was hiding out in the Abundant Life Temple. Garrison knew all this. He goes by to talks to Johnny Brewer, gives Johnny Brewer the signal, because this is all set up. This is a staged event in advance, right? This isn't some fucking guy who randomly stops in a shoe store. No, this is the Kennedy assassination is the story of a series of staged events. That's it.
Ruby seems to be at most of them.
Yes. Because he had to be. So, and Ruby knew all the people along the way. And so, like, here's another great example. Like, Dave Yaris and Lenny Patrick, they come to Dallas. They're staying next to the Carousel Club in a property using aliases of David Leon Miller and Isidore Max Miller. Okay. The place they rented from was owned by Bernice Click. Bernice Click is an associate of Jack Ruby, and like the aunt of Bo Click, who was the taxi cab driver who drove Oswald to the fucking theater that morning. Okay. So to me, this is even more evidence. When I found the relationship to Bo Click, to me, it was even more substantiation that there was this person existed, that they were connected to Jack Ruby, and that Oswald probably was not at the book depository because he was driven, as was said by Jesse Curry that morning. Right. So all of these things started to fall into place. And then when it's like, well, where's the evidence that Oswald's at the book depository? And it's like, oh yeah, there is none. Zero.
Well, like, it's coming from a bunch of old OSS guys, right? Like,
correct.
Most World War II era kind of OSS dudes, right?
Right. Bill Shelley and fucking Roy Truly.
Is Lovelady, was he OSS too?
No, I don't think he went to the war. I think he was. I don't think he was like. too young, or
he's
he
in
wasn't the right age.
he is in the Elkins photo though on the steps right in front.
Yeah,
of that.
yeah,
That's
the
him.
ultra photo. Yeah,
That's Lovelady.
clearly. Like, I don't even know, that photo's got tampering all over it. Like, you can clearly see on the steps to the left of that, there's clearly a fucking Jew with the black hat and the white scarf around the neck, but the face is scratched off.
Oh, I don't know about that. I haven't seen that.
Oh,
yeah,
you got to take a look spend
don't.
some time just looking at the Ultrans photo. It's got so much gold.
Well,
in
I
it.
know that you can see a hole in the windshield, I think, in that photo, and obviously
you can see
Kennedy's already grabbing his throat,
which doesn't jive with the Zapruder film, does it? Not even close. According to the Zapruder film, he's not hit until he gets behind the fucking
the Stemmons Freeway sign. Yeah.
So back to the Texas Theater. So Oswald is in there for 30 minutes. Kerry Thornley enters at 1:36, and he allegedly goes up to the balcony. So this is where I have some major problems with the official story. Well, I have complete problems with the official story everywhere, but allegedly this series of events didn't start until 1:36 at the shoe store. He goes in there, and then Johnny Brewer goes and talks to Julia Postal, who's the lady in the box office, right? She's a young white girl. And so this is at like 1:37-ish. Johnny Brewer then goes inside, grabs Butch Burroughs, and says, "Hey, we got to go look for this fucking guy. Let's go wander around the theater and see what we can find." They do that for a couple of minutes. Then they return to Julia Postal, and then she makes her phone call to the Dallas police. However, the Dallas police are on scene by 1:40 p.m. So what possible time could she have made her phone call?
How could they have been there that quickly?
Exactamundo. That's the problem I fucking have. If she didn't make the phone call till 1:39 or 1:40, there's no way they could have gotten there. Because I'll tell you with certainty, because I'm an ex-cop, in today's modern technology with all the call center shit, you're looking at like 3 to 5 minutes before a call even gets notified to the road, if you're lucky. There ain't no fucking way. The call came in, it got written on some note card, handed
dispatch,
to somebody. Right.
Then
it would have taken 10, 15 minutes in 1963, and they were on scene by the time the phone call was hung up, so it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it was a prearranged staged event again, right? So they go in there, they grab Oswald from the bottom. This is approximately 150-ish, 155-ish. Butch Burroughs then tells, I believe, James Douglas, he tells him within a 3 or 4 minute span of Oswald being arrested and taken out the front of the theater, we have another Oswald, someone who looked like he could have been Oswald's brother. They look so alike. Arrested in the balcony and taken out of the back of the theater. This is substantiated by the statements of Bernard Hare, who owned Bernie's Hobby House, which was 2 doors down from the Texas Theater. So Bernard Hare sees commotion out front. He goes out front and he can't see anything because there's too many people. So he goes out back and he sees a line of cop cars in the alleyway out back. He then sees a man who he believes to have been Lee Harvey Oswald, because he sees him on the news later. He sees this man dragged out of the back of the theater wearing a white T-shirt, who looked just like Oswald, receding hairline and all this stuff, put into a cop car and then driven away. It's not for 25 years that he gives an interview to CBS, and CBS informs him that Oswald was taken out of the front of the theater, not the back. And he's adamant he saw Oswald, or somebody he thought was Oswald, pulled out of the back of the theater. Clearly, this is Kerry Thornley, the second person who entered at 1:36, who then went to the balcony, as Oswald had been in there since 1:06 and was taken out by the cops out the front. To me, this makes perfect sense based on all the witness statements. And if you understand, and you have to look at the assassination through a lens of tradecraft, then all this makes perfect fucking sense. When you realize in the anticipation to lead up to this, they were employing tradecraft. They employed tradecraft all during all the impersonations of Oswald, everything going on with this Tippit shooting, all tradecraft. The setup at the Texas Theater, where, as we shall see momentarily, Ruby was there as well. All prearranged staged event. Had to have been. It's all tradecraft, all spycraft, right? So Kerry Thornley's taken out of the back of the theater. A man inside the theater will later testify to the Warren Commission, who then cuts him off, but then later to James Fetzer, who's kind of a fucking kook. But hey, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Oh, the great Zapruder film hoax. Yeah, he kind of poisoned the well on Kennedy research. And
he's poisoned the well on everything he touches.
Paul is dead. I mean, I'm a big Beatles fan, and that's anyways.
So basically, what we have here is a man named George Applin will later state he saw Jack Ruby inside the Texas Theater at the time of Oswald's arrest. This, to me, is corroborated by a detective named Stringfellow, who not only is the guy who wrote the report on having arrested Oswald in the balcony of the Texas Theater, he also wrote a report stating that he searched a pickup truck in the back alley of the Texas Theater that was still running at the time when he got there. This, to me, completely corresponds with the green pickup truck Jack Ruby was seen driving earlier that morning in front of the grassy knoll.
When Julianne Mercer?
Was that Julie? Yeah, it was Julianne Mercer. Yes. I'm sorry. I thought it was Gene Hill. It was Julianne Mercer saw him earlier that morning. And so, yeah, to me, that was a straight shot series of events. Jack Ruby was driving that truck around that day. You know, he ends up going to Parkland Hospital where he's seen by Seth Cantor. He then ends up at the Texas Theater. He's bouncing all over the fucking place, right? So
he's a busy boy.
Yeah, busy guy. And who's establishing alibis for him this entire time?
His brother.
Samuel Ruby, right? Samuel Ruby. So to me, this makes perfect sense, right? It sounds crazy. It sounds like I'm out on a fucking, out on a limb here, but not really. When you really break down each of the individual incidents, it comes to make perfect sense. And when you can map all this stuff out and be like, yeah, Jack was here, and Samuel Ruby was here, Samuel was here, and Samuel was here, creating this alibi, everything seems to then make sense. So then what you have is within 5 minutes of these arrests having taken place, Oswald's obviously taken out the front, loaded into Westbrook's blue unmarked police car where him and Gerald Hill take him to jail.
Lots of fanfare for the photo, the scuffle. Like there's how many?
There was a fucking film crew. There was a news film crew in the Texas Theater.
Come on, dude.
Here's what I've come to conclude. If it's not captured on film, it wasn't Oswald. So all the stories we have of Oswald that were not captured on film, which is 90% of them, it was Seymour or Thornley.
Including the gun range with the guy handing the rifle over the fence.
Yep. And he was seen there with a big, large, husky, dark-complected guy with long hair who looked like a beatnik. Yeah, that was Lawrence Howard with his shaggy long hair at the time, because Lawrence Howard looked especially fat and sloppy in the weeks leading up to the assassination. Jesus Christ.
He put on a lot of weight. I mean, I'm not like I'm no shrinking violet, but he was a heavy fellow.
Yeah, and did you see the pictures of him back in 60, 61 when he was lean?
He was more svelte back then.
He was more of a fucking thick-chested guy than he was a big fat guy, but he let himself go. It was wild. And so, so then you have him being seen at Mac Pate's garage wearing the Kerry Thornley 5 minutes later, driving the red Ford Falcon owned by Igor Vaganov, who's a low-level spook mafia guy. I've got the entire backstory to that car. But that red Ford Falcon has Carl Mather's license plate on it, which comes back to the gray Plymouth that was being driven around by David Ferry. Which will later, when the FBI goes to Carl Mather's house, that license plate will end up being back on that vehicle. So
what's to the supposed quote of Oswald being interrogated, which of course there was no note saying, "Oh, don't mistake that with Ruth's car. I don't want to involve her in this."
Here's the thing we have to realize:
is that just made up or what?
I think so. Every single fucking person who said Oswald said something in custody is a proven liar at some point or another. So I don't believe
I found this note. I was opening up a book and I found this note from Lee, and it just
all those people can blow me. Like, I just don't buy any of that shit.
Even their interviews from the 80s strike me as so disingenuous.
Yeah. You talking about Ruth Payne? Yeah. Ruth Payne's a lying cunt. Fuck her to death. If I could stab her in the neck, I would.
Jesus, well, we're not trying to incite violence here, guys. Corey, we're on YouTube. Let's
sorry. Fuck her to death. Like, she can go suck a fucking dick. Like, she's a lying CIA cunt. And she ties in with the Mormon connection somehow, but I don't even want to go there. It's just, when I start to think of the Mormons tying into this, my brain starts to fucking bleed.
I think she just hit 90, right? Didn't she just turn 90?
Yeah, of all the people who had to live this long, she could.
Oh yeah, she'll live.
Her existence is rubbing it in our faces. Yeah, what happened? Fuck her to death.
Even the hubby there, who she was on and off with, who they were not married but still living in a retirement community.
That was a CIA relationship.
He died. Oh, of course it was. Of course
they never gave a fuck about each other.
No.
Did they even have any kids? No, they never had any kids or nothing.
No, I believe they did. Who became a documentary filmmaker who killed the electric car? You remember that documentary?
Oh yeah.
Who killed the electric car? I'm pretty sure that was made by Ruth Payne's kid. We can fact check that off air and look into
I wonder
that.
if the CIA goes to you and go, hey, I know you really don't like this guy, but you got to fuck him. We need a kid. I mean, we got plans for your kid 30 years from now. So can you spit one out, please? Like, I wonder if they do that shit.
You'll be fine. We'll give you, we'll give you $500,000 per generation, per lifetime. You'll be covered. All you got to do is lie and keep up the facade. And now I'm hearing that they want to change the topography at Dealey Plaza. They want to totally get rid of it.
They touch that place, I will fly there and fucking chain myself to it.
Have you been there, Corey?
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, it's small. It is that whole thing where it's small in person.
Tiny. It's tiny. You could throw a rock from the front door of the depository to the fucking shooter on the grassy knoll, like no problem. I could fucking bean somebody with a fucking baseball off their fucking
That's
head.
what my uncle said. I could throw a fastball at him. And I took a couple of my
small. I couldn't believe it. And the grassy knoll is like you're standing on it, and it looks like on TV, it looks like it's huge, but you're standing there and you're like, bro, this is like 20 feet.
Which makes it even more hubris and brazen, the fact that they were down there with fucking rifles. And you talk about this in your book too.
It was
2 days beforehand, the Dallas police observed 2 guys with suits.
Did I mention that in the book? I don't remember if I mentioned that in the book or not.
It's either the book or one of your videos. But
see, I almost hate it when people have seen all my shit and read my shit, because then they can't tell me where I put my shit, because I don't even remember.
I don't even know. Just that story shows you there was 2 dudes there behind the fence on November 20th.
Well, there were 3, and I believe it was fucking. Well, there was 2 incidents, right? Because you have the one incident of the guy who looked like Oswald, and guy who looked like Jack Ruby, and the trunk of the car incident, right? So there's that one. And
with the muddy footprints.
And the women who saw that, no, that's the other one. And this is the one where the women who were at like the sewing shop observed them, right? And there's that one. And then also you have the incident where the 2 guys pointing rifles over the fence.
Yes.
And that incident on the 20th was clearly Jack Ruby, William Seymour, and Jack Valenti. Clearly. Because Jack Valenti was alleged by a guy named Pereira to have been in Dallas with fucking Oswald and Ruby that day. So
Even
when I saw that
the 22nd.
On the 20th. Yeah, on the 20th. So when I saw that, it was like, see, here's the thing. When people give information that they don't understand the significance of, then they're telling the truth.
That's when you know it's truthful.
That's when you know it's true, because they don't understand what the fuck they're saying. But when you do and they don't, you can say with certainty that that's a true statement. So when that to me is how I put pieces together, and I can be like, okay, that's ironclad because it was said over here, and this fucking guy said it over here, and he doesn't know about this person over here. So when you have like this cross-referencing going on, right, the substantiation, and this honestly, this is what separates me from the other douchebag Kennedy fucks, because none of them are cops or ever have been cops or had any experiences being a researcher or any of that stuff. Like I was taught by the fucking best.
You've actually arrested people, done witness statements.
Yeah.
You've done all that shit.
By my calculation, I made like 5,000 fucking arrests. I've worked some major high level like embezzlement case, mostly financial stuff. Like when you're working the road and you get these big cases like that involve violence, it goes to robbery, homicide, or it goes to a detective upstairs. But you get most of the cases you get that are like any financial stuff. You get to work them yourself, unless it gets to a point where like you have to like spend 8 hours going through a database, right? Then it goes to a detective. But like I got to work all my own fucking cases, so I learned the investigative process and how to tell when people are bullshitting you, because you got to think, as a cop, I would talk to 10, 15, 20 people every single day, and everybody would lie to you. Everybody, witnesses, victims, everyone's got a fucking dog in the hunt. And so everyone's got to spin. And so you got to learn to fucking read people and tell when they're bullshitting and understand little things that substantiate people's stories. Like when I tell the story of Dorothea Dean at Dean's Dairy Way, who sees Carrie Thornley fleeing from the junk shop on Jefferson, the way the story is presented is obvious that it's true.
There's no way she could have added.
No, you're not going to know. She came up with a family anecdote. She said that when her mom found the jacket, she came up with this. She said, "Mom, you could have, instead of giving it to the cops, you could have paid our way through college with that jacket. Like it was a collector's item." Right. No fucking person who's going to lie and make up a story is going to come up with substantiation in an anecdote. They would never ever do that, because they wouldn't know to do that. Because as an ex-cop who's interviewed 10, 15,000 fucking people, I can tell if you're bullshitting me without you even saying a goddamn word. Like I was a fucking human lie detector by the time I left the fucking police force. Like interviewing people is an art form. And so I look at these other jerk off Kennedy researchers who go through these people and they're like, "Oh, well, obviously this is true." I'm like, "You're such a dumb fuck. You don't even know how to vet your own fucking work." It's like it's unreal. It's
I'll be
really
right back,
unreal.
Cory. I got to take another quick break. I'll be right back. You keep
Sure.
keep going on the theater. I'll be right back.
You got it. So the Texas Theater incident being another staged event in a long series of staged event going all the way back through everything that happened in Dealey Plaza. You could even include the incident with Jerry Belknap, the epileptic who had the alleged seizure in Dealey Plaza just prior to the motorcade turning in. These are all staged events, right? Set up in advance. They know that things are going to happen at particular times. And when you get into the tippet shooting, you really start to understand this, right? You start to understand that they had to have everything on a schedule because they had buses involved, right? Allegedly, Oswald gets on a bus sometime between 12:36 and 12:40 p.m. He allegedly gets out of that bus around 12:40 to 12:42, gets in a cab, and then makes his way over to Oak Cliff in William Whaley's cab sometime around 12:48 to 12:50, right? And so, and then when you see the tippet was waiting for somebody at the Gloco station to get off a bus, and the bus gets to where he was at 1:00, and nobody gets off that bus, you can see how everything had to happen on schedule. When you see how Westbrook and Croy show up at the boarding house at exactly 2:00 and honk the horn twice, you can see that Kerry Thornley had to be there exactly on time in order for him to have heard the horn to be honked twice, right? So that means the person who got into the cab had to have been dropped off on a schedule with enough time to go to the other boarding house to notify Kerry Thornley to walk over to 1026 North Beckley in order to be there in time for the two cops to show up and honk the horn twice, right? So every single little thing that happened down to the minute on schedule. Then when they pick up Kerry Thornley and drive him to the tippet shooting. Now, a lot of Kennedy researchers have gone to great lengths to try to walk the distance between 1026 North Beckley and 404 East 10th Street, which is fucking ridiculous. It's 0.8 of a mile. So that's 0.8 of a mile, which basically you could walk in about 10 minutes, 12 minutes, something like that. Okay. The idea that anybody could get picked, could leave the house at 1:00 and then get to the tippet shooting to shoot tippet by 1:06 is fucking ridiculous. Right. So that is why they had to extend the time of the shooting to 1:16 p.m. It was at 1:16 p.m. that the official story says that JD Tippett got shot. Right. Therefore, it took Oswald 20 minutes or so to make it to the shoe store, right? But even that doesn't make fucking sense. What the fuck is Oswald supposed to have done for 20 minutes? How is he supposed to have walked 1/10 of a mile in 20 minutes? It's even the official story doesn't make any goddamn sense. And anybody with half a fucking brain would understand that. So the point I'm making here is that the scheduling of this thing shows the level of planning that had to go into it. And when you look at the level of planning that had to go into it, that's when you come to realize that every single event that happened going back to Dealey Plaza had to have been staged, planned, and executed on a very tight schedule, all leading up to the Texas Theater incident, which, and like I've already said, 1:39 is the earliest that Julia Postal could have made the phone call. Yet at 1:40 p.m., the cops are already on scene. There's no possibility that her phone call is the reason that cops showed up there, which means that the cops had to have been there on a schedule. They had to have shown up there at 1:40 p.m. because it was planned in advance, independent of Julia Postal's phone call. So the point I was just making is that everything we've seen so far was on a schedule, and it was all planned in advance, and it had to have been executed on a very tight schedule. And so then when you get to Oswald in the theater, I'm convinced Oswald was supposed to have been shot and killed in the theater. So
you had the gun not going off, right? Because of the hand, like
there's something fishy here. Something's fishy here. Because Oswald never had that revolver, right? The revolver ended up going, it was rejected by the post office, and it ended up at Seaport Traders, where the person who picked it up signed the name Paxton. Okay. I've come across the name Paxton in New Orleans 2 more times in 2 unrelated file sets. So someone in New Orleans picked up that revolver. It sure as hell was not Oswald, but somehow it made its way to David Ferry. We can identify this revolver because it had a unique barrel it was worked on. And it had a very unique barrel replacement. Okay. I think it had an extended or shortened barrel. I forget the details, but it was a very unique revolver. But It was rejected by the post office, ended up at Seaport Traders, picked up by somebody named Paxton, made its way to David Ferry, and then obviously, because they're framing Oswald with it, it had to go from David Ferry to a Dallas police officer between the time that Tippit shot at 106 and the time that David Ferry is, between the time that Oswald is set up at about 145. So David Ferry had to go and meet up with a cop somewhere and hand off the revolver in order for them to plant it. And so when it doesn't go off, I don't recall the specifics on the revolver. I know they test fired it, and I don't recall the results of the test firing. I don't remember if it worked or not. I think it did work, if I'm not mistaken, which means that in the theater, somebody pulled it out, and there was probably a mess of hands grabbing for the gun all at once. And somebody's hand got wedged in there when they pulled the trigger.
Right.
And the person who was supposed to get shot was Oswald. Okay.
He wasn't supposed to survive the Texas theater.
No.
Yeah.
Fuck no. That complicated things 100-fold by him surviving the Texas theater.
Ruby got the call and his skin, his blood ran cold.
Yes. Yep. Exactamundo. And then
he knew what he had to do. So we got a couple more chats here. And this before I want to preface this one. I've talked to the Secret Service researcher in the Kennedy assassination, Vince Palmera.
Yeah, fuck that guy too.
Well, okay, that's Cory.
I've reached out to that guy a bunch of times. He completely ignores me, and he deletes my comments on his Twitter posts. So,
maybe we can do a discussion.
Yeah,
you and
that'd
him.
be great.
I've had him on the show.
Look, I'm going to make a prediction. No Kennedy researcher will ever debate me on anything because they can't and they know it. And I've been rejected from numerous debate offers in the past. You'll never get any one of them to show up on a show with me. It's just, I'm making a prediction right now. I'll even put money on it.
Oh, sure. Hey, I'd like to moderate that. I've out of good faith. I respect your research. I respect a lot of what Vince has done. I've talked to him.
The thing that bugs me the most about him is he's supposed to be the expert on the Secret Service, and that guy isn't like the world expert on McIntyre photos number 1 and 2, the 2 clearest photos of the Secret Service car post the underpass.
Well, he thinks it's Jack Reedy and Paul Landis.
That's totally contradicted by their sworn statements, both of which are provably inside the vehicle by the time it hits the underpass because of the presence of Morales on the side of the car who's got a flat top, and neither one of those guys has a flat top.
It does look a lot like Morales, and I said that to Vince. I said, "Dude, that looks like David Morales."
It's clearly Morales, and it's clearly Jack Valenti. And I got 100 people who've said the same thing. They said as soon as they saw that picture that I pointed out that I showed to them, they were blown away because it was obviously Valenti and Morales. And then when I get guys like Vince Palmera who've been studying this their whole lives, they deny it because it fucking upends their entire work and it makes their entire life's research garbage in 30 seconds. And that's why these guys fucking hate me. And they'll never talk to me ever.
I think any honest researcher and anybody in good faith should be willing to change their mind.
Exactamundo. And that's my problem with the Kennedy researchers is none of them are acting in good faith. None of them will ever admit they're fucking wrong, and none of them will ever talk to me. And I'll say that to any one of their faces, especially guys like DiEugenio.
I agree with that sentiment, Cory. I mean, I've been looking into 9/11, the Kennedy assassination for most of my life, and when I was very young, I was like, oh, no, there's no way a plane hit the Pentagon. But obviously a plane did hit the Pentagon.
Hit the Pentagon, yeah, for sure.
It did. I mean, the evidence is there, and you have to go where the evidence is. And you shouldn't have it's like the Warren, what we hate the Warren Commission for, and I call it the Dulles Commission. They already had their preconceived notion, and they needed everything to fit that. Right. So they didn't, instead of going after the facts, they were like, well, we got 3 shots. We got Oswald. We got the 6th floor. We need to make everything fit to that. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the Kennedy research community, they do that with their pet theories. And
so I listened to an interview just a couple of weeks ago. It was a brand new interview. And I had the guy talking about the Oswald encounter in the lunchroom with the Coke. And I'm just like wanting to shoot myself at this point. I'm like, how does these people not figure this out? This has been out there for 50 years, and these guys can't realize based on Baker's statements.
Are you talking about the journalist who just died? That journalist who died, who ran into Oswald, who said that he ran. I'm going to use the phone. I ran into Oswald. Right, You're talking about that. I think that guy just.
Who was it? Pierce Allman or Robert McNeil? It was Pierce Allman and Robert McNeil who claimed.
I think it was It was
So
McNeil.
none of those stories make any sense either. So if both stories are to be believed, are we to believe that Pierce Allman and Robert McNeil both asked Oswald independently of each other where a phone was in the building? Both were answered by Oswald
Over there
within the same minutes, but those two guys were not together. Like, and these Kennedy researchers believe that shit. Like, I've seen recently Kennedy researchers reference the Robert McNeil statement as proof Oswald left the building. I'm like,
yeah. But so the thing I was going to say, like, so Dealey Plaza, there had been other presidential motorcades that have gone through Dealey Plaza. I think back to Roosevelt, which I talked to Palomera about, and they did not take that right from Houston
they went through Main Street.
They went straight through the underpass on the other side of the underpass, away from the grassy knoll. So.
Well, that all goes back to the argument between Kennedy's people and the Dallas Citizen Council on where the Kennedy was going to talk, because Kennedy wanted to talk at the Women's Building, and to get to the Women's Building, you'd have taken Main Street. But Sam Bloom and Jack Valenti and all those,
right. So the original letter came from Valenti, right, to invite him to Dallas.
Well, that was the letter to invite him to Austin, I think, to go to the Albert Thomas dinner. But Valenti was in charge of all the other stuff, and he was on the board of the Dallas Citizen Council, which Sam Bloom was the head of the Dallas Citizens Council, and that was who decided on where the motorcade would go. And so, basically, the argument came down to, and I actually have the specifics. I just found them recently on the arguments here, and they involved Elizabeth Forsling Harris, who was a CIA agent working for Sam Bloom at the time, and she was the coordinator between her and Bill Moyers to Washington. And so she had a lot to do with this, with the shaping of the motorcade and whether or not the bubble top was on and all this stuff. It goes back to Elizabeth Forsling Harris, who was partners with Gloria Steinem in Ms. Magazine, which was a known CIA front, right? So
Gloria Steinem was CIA.
Right, totally.
Yeah.
So you should have Johnny Vedmore on to talk about that stuff. He's an expert at that angle.
Him and Whitney Webb had done really great research. Yeah,
it's great because their research like butts right up against mine. Their kind of starts where mine stops, which is awesome because I don't want to have to go down. I don't want to go down that Pottinger Avenue at all. So, but Johnny was done some good work on that. But yeah, so it all connected through Elizabeth Forsling Harris, who was working directly for Bill Moyers and Sam Bloom, right? So she was working for private contractor Sam Bloom, but then she was working publicly for the White House under Bill Moyers as a point of contact. So she was playing both sides. And how do you get to play both sides unless you're CIA, right? And so, the connections all ran through the Daltex building and Sam Bloom and like the Maryland Belt Company and like all this. They were running all kinds of scams out of the Daltex building.
Did Zapruder work in Daltex, the dressmaker, or was he a part owner of Daltex?
From what I'm gathering, him being part owner of Daltex is not accurate. So it's looking like.
And who was the guy that was like, oh, I just got to find a payphone? Who was at Daltex? Who was supposedly also in L.A. when Bobby was killed?
You're talking about
he's a mafia.
Eugene Hale Brading.
Yeah, who had multiple aliases.
Right, he was a courier from Lansky, and he was very close with James the Weasel Fratiano.
So was he like a spotter or like a plant? Like, I mean, I think he was obviously there.
Yeah, he was definitely there.
Braden.
Yeah, who knows why he was there? I think he was there because they were all there. I mean, honestly, I think, in my opinion, I have found Joe Anitas. I have found fucking Shackley. Obviously, we have Morales, Otto Scorzani. I mean, you fucking name it. These guys were there. It was a who's who, you know?
Do you think Joseph Miltier was actually there?
I don't see why not. There's no reason for him not to have been. It wasn't like this thing was a secret. People put way too much weight into that. People were like, "Oh, Miltier knew, so there had to have been conspiracy." Like, that's what you're going with? That's all this evidence, and you want to go with Miltier? Really? The shit people fucking latch onto and obsess over, driving like fucking Prayer Man. People spent like decades on Prayer Man.
I don't even know what the significance is of Prayer Man. I've seen it in the forums. What is the whole thesis on Prayer Man?
Prayer Man allegedly is Oswald is not Billy Lovelady. Oswald was behind Billy Lovelady, and he's the person who allegedly had his hands together. Like, fuck off with your bullshit nonsense, right? See, here's how I do things. If you have like a theory on how things go, like David Ferry, my theory with David Ferry is I'm pretty goddamn sure David Ferry was one of the shooters on the knoll, and he was seen by Velma. And therefore, if David Ferry was there, I should find somebody matching the descriptions as provided by Ed Hoffman. And so when I say I have pictures of David Ferry in the railroad yards, it's not because I found pictures and was like, oh, that looks like David Ferry. It's because I'm like, oh, I should find pictures of David Ferry because this is my hypothesis. And then when I find the pictures, I'm like, there he is. Not the other way around. And too many people do it the other way around. And it's ridiculous.
Hoffman's father, though, doesn't believe him. Have you seen that?
Well, Ed Hoffman provided a description of a man wearing a dark blue suit with a black felt hat and a wide band.
He's the mute.
Yeah, totally. He provided information that he wouldn't understand the significance of. And that's plain and simple.
So do you think maybe his father said he wasn't there to protect him or he did?
Yes.
Yes. Probably.
Yes.
Yeah. Because he didn't understand the full implications of it.
The same thing with the statements of Doris Holen. So Dale Oswald apologist Myers, once again, got more information on a woman named Doris Holen, who basically told him directly that she was upstairs in her apartment on 10th Street, and she heard a commotion outside. She looked out her window, which was upstairs, so she's looking downwards. She provides a great description of cop car in the alley at the time of the shooting, cop car perpendicular on the street, Tippett's car at the time of the shooting. She describes a man wearing a white jacket, which would be Kerry Thornley wearing the jacket he discards, a man in a dark blue suit, David Ferry. Obviously, she wouldn't understand the description of that. And the fact that David Ferry left in a fucking gray Plymouth. She wouldn't know any of that stuff if she wasn't exactly where she was. But fucking she gives an interview to Dale Myers, and Dale Myers systematically went through like fucking lease records and property records, and he called landlords, and he tried to make an attempt to debunk the idea that she was living there at that place. And I'm like, I don't give a goddamn fuck whose apartment it was, if she was living there, if she wasn't living there. She provided information corroborated from a half a dozen fucking sources that she wouldn't understand the significance of if she wasn't exactly where the fuck she said she was. So This is why that pisses me off about these quote unquote researchers who like have never been investigators, who have never been a detective, who've never been a real fucking cop and had real training on how to do this shit. Because when you have and you've done real investigations and you've talked to 10 or 15,000 fucking witnesses, you get a grip on whose statements are true based on the things that they tell you. It's easy to tell a fucking liar, but none of these jerk offs know how to do that. And they fucking people like Dale Myers, like he's written so many articles with information presented to him that show that clearly there was a conspiracy.
Oh, he has a prerogative going into it. He has an agenda. He has an agenda going into it.
Correct. 100% has an agenda going into it. And that's the case with like everybody. Everyone's got their own little shtick on this or that or whatever, you know, but there's a couple little things about the assassination that make it obvious. Number one, all the information about the Winterland. We haven't talked about the Winterland yet, have we?
No, we didn't go into the Winterland, but man, you dug up some shit on the Winterland with the Johnson family and with the collections of Valenti and
all right. So
David Ferry's cover and Beowulf and all.
So the Winterland to me was like the most important discoveries I made. And
to our audience, let me just preface this. So this is when David Ferry is brought in by Jim Garrison, and he talks about going hunting or going skating, and he changes his story. And he said, "Oh, I'm interested in opening up a ice rink. I want to open up my own ice rink." So I went and talked to this guy. In Houston or Galveston or wherever it was?
In Houston, yeah, at the Winterland ice skating rink.
About the logistics of your ice rink, and I want to learn more. So, this connects to David Ferry. But Cory dug up some shit about that.
So the assassination happens on Friday, and David Ferry is allegedly in New Orleans. And so the official story, and what everybody accepts, including 100% of Kennedy researchers out there, they all believe that David Ferry was still in fucking New Orleans, where at 12 o'clock he's seen by G. Ray Gill's lawyer. G. Ray Gill is Carlos Marcello's lawyer. G. Ray Gill has a secretary named Alice Guidros. Allegedly, Alice Guidros tells the FBI David Ferry's in her office at noon. Absolutely impossible.
That's not true.
Dallas. He was in Ferry. Ferry was in Dallas 2 days before the assassination.
What about the shit that they were told to throw in the trash that showed an VIP?
That's a couple days after the assassination. The same woman, Alice Guidros, is confronted by a woman named Clara Flournoy Gay, who's getting some work done for her by G. Ray Gill. She goes to G. Ray Gill's office. This is like the next day after the assassination. She goes in there and she sees like a chart that's got like Elm Street and a box that says VIP. And it's obvious it's got something to do with the assassination. And it was in David Ferry's desk that they were cleaning out. So she takes it and she's going to give it to the FBI. Alice Guidro snatches it out of her hand and throws it in the trash and is like, "Get the fuck out of here, bitch," is basically what she says to her. And so,
dude, just that alone, Cory, like just that alone.
Just that alone, right? But that's just a drop in the bucket, right? And so Alice Guidros is a lying cunt. She says David Ferry's in New Orleans when he's in fucking Dallas. Okay, so the whole story, the alibi story of David Ferry is that later on that evening around 6 o'clock, he goes to a party for Carlos Marcello, who was acquitted of charges. Allegedly, he's seen in court that day, but the only people he's seen in court by are fucking G. Ray Gill and Carlos Marcello, right? So I don't think you can use those guys as credible witnesses, especially when you have a mountain of evidence that David Ferry was in fucking Dallas. So you have all this alibi stuff going on for David Ferry, and allegedly he picks up two guys. He allegedly picks up Alvin Beaubouf and a guy named Melvin Coffey. However, Melvin Coffey is just an alias being used by a guy named Leighton Martins. Why they needed to feel the need to use an alias on this, I have no idea. But these three guys allegedly leave New Orleans around 6 o'clock. They end up in Houston sometime around 3 a.m, where they check into the Alamo Motel. The next day, allegedly, this is official story stuff. They go to the Winterland ice skating rink where they meet with a guy named Chuck Rowland. I'll give you a hint, that's not his real name. And Chuck Rowland says that David Ferry and two guys went there, ice skated a whole bunch, and that David Ferry never asked him about ice skating, but yet he introduced himself as David Ferry 5 separate times. He said, "Hi, I'm David Ferry. I'm here." 5 separate times, which should kind of give you a hint that maybe David Ferry wasn't really there, right? So when you dig into the Winterland story, it turns out that it definitely was not David Ferry, and that Sergio Arcacha Smith had gone to the Winterland in order to give David Ferry an alibi. Now, why would David Ferry need an alibi if David Ferry was not in Dallas?
He wasn't involved in some fuckery.
Right. So David Ferry was in Dallas, where he flew in 2 days before the assassination. And the evening of the assassination, his plane was flown out by a guy named Joe Cody, who was a Dallas police officer, one of the best friends of Jack Ruby. And we know this because Joe Cody gets into a small plane crash in Shreveport, Louisiana, that evening of the assassination. Allegedly, he just went out for a flight and then he decided to take a bus home. So yeah, doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But no, that he was flying David Ferry's plane back to New Orleans, where he went to Shreveport to refuel, and he just bumped into something while he was on the ground. It wasn't a real big deal, but still, there's a written record of it. And so that's how David Ferry got in to Fort Worth. His plane was flown out, and then the evening of the assassination, he drives out in a light blue Ford Falcon station wagon, goes to Hammond, Louisiana. He goes to Hammond, Louisiana, where he hides out overnight until the next night, Saturday. Now, instead of going to the Winterland, Sergio Arcacha goes there to present this alibi to the world, right? But you wouldn't need an alibi if David Ferry was not in Dallas. So clearly David Ferry was in Dallas. All the pieces of the puzzle fit together with David Ferry having been in Dallas.
Was Arcacha one of the guys in the car at Rose Cherami?
Yes. So Sergio Arcacha and Emilio Santana are involved with Rose Cherami. They're on their way to Dallas. 2 days before the assassination on November 20th, they're fed up with this bitch's shit. She's like a junkie and a prostitute. She's a
runner and a courier for the mob.
Correct. They go into
her son is still around. I've talked to her son.
Oh, really?
Interesting. I have. Yeah, he lives in Texas. He'd be a good guy for you to talk to.
So they go to the I think it's called the Silver Slipper, and they go and they have a couple drinks. And Mac Manuel is the owner of the bar, and he basically she was a real cunt, so he threw her out directly. And it seems as though Arcacha and Emilio Santana roughed her up a little bit. She was a little bruised when she gets to the hospital. So ultimately, she is thrown out of this bar. And as she gets out of the bar, she's crossing the street and she gets hit by a car, which is kind of fucking funny. So people try to say that she got thrown out of a car.
Well, she was all smacked out on heroin too, though, to be fair.
Yeah. So it wasn't as bad. So if you're going to hit somebody, make sure they're on heroin before you hit them. Okay. And so she ends up in the hospital, but she's a real fucking bitch. So they call the cops. The cops get out there, and this Lieutenant Francis Fruge, and he realizes she's all strung out. So he sends her to the mental ward at Jackson, which plays a pretty significant role in this Oswald story later on. But basically, she's a real bitch, and she's like, they're going to kill Kennedy. They're going to kill Kennedy. Nobody believes her. And so at the end of the day, she gets locked up in the mental ward. Kennedy gets killed. So Francis Fruge shits his pants. He's like, oh, my God. She said Kennedy was going to get killed. He goes back to investigate. Turns out the two guys that were with her were Sergio Arcacha Smith and Emilio Santana, and that they were on their way to Dallas. And I put them in the book depository and the Daltex as two of the shooters who were in David Ferry's crew ultimately, right?
Right. They were connected to him. And we talked about this briefly before we went on about Coup in Dallas,
right.
Burley's book, which I think
Yeah, Kuendalis Albarelli, pretty much, he did a good job. He identified the Corsicans who came to town. It's really a lot about Jean-Pierre Lafitte, who is still, even after reading Albarelli's book, he's still a man of mystery to me. I found some pictures. One of my guys, actually a guy you should probably talk to, Jake Ehrlich III. I don't know if you know who Jake Ehrlich Sr. is.
No, I don't know.
Oh, mob boss, lawyer. He was a lawyer to Murder Inc.
Oh, wow.
His grandson, Jake Ehrlich III, is in my chat group. I talk to him frequently. I've had some private conversations with him. His grandfather, dude, amazing stories, dude. Like when you realize who this guy is, you're going to shit your pants. And his grandson is like writing a book about him. It's got amazing.
Oh, that's awesome.
Connected to all these guys we're talking about, directly to Meyer Lansky and all this stuff.
Well, there's a Meyer Lansky movie with Harvey Keitel, but I
watched it.
Is that bullshit or is it good?
Okay. Let me tell you about this. There's one scene in this movie that is one of the most important scenes in all of American history. And they do it wrong, but they get the point across. And it was a scene when Reuven Daphne met with Bugsy Siegel and recruits the mafia into the Israeli cause. That scene is in that movie. So
really,
it's worth watching that movie just for that one fucking scene.
Because I haven't pulled the trigger yet, Corey.
But the original, no, watch it. It's okay. Harvey Keitel, he's a fucking bad lieutenant. I mean, come on, he's great in everything.
Dude, it's fucking hard. It's the wolf. It's fucking.
Show me how you suck that cock.
Fucking Mean Streets. Fucking Pulp Fiction. Yeah. I mean, dude, dude, Copland. How good is Copland's underrated? I mean, as a former
I need to rewatch that for sure.
Copland is one of Sly's best. He actually gained weight for that movie.
But no, that's that to me is one of the most important historical events. That's like the beginning of the relationship between the Israelis and the mafia, and that fundamental meeting between Reuven Daphne and Bugsy Siegel is like the beginning of that relationship, which went on to be the relationship that killed Kennedy. So that's
right. It goes back decades.
That relationship, that was it in 46 between Daphne and Siegel. And so between that meeting in 46 and the Kennedy assassination, you've got like
a lot of water under the bridge.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like by 63, they're one organization. So like all these people who try to like ignore the idea that the Israelis were involved are like, you can always tell who like studies history or who studies Kennedy. There's a big difference between people who study Kennedy and people who study history, because the Kennedy people they don't know about any of this stuff. They don't know about any of the relationship between the Israelis and the mafia. They don't know any of this stuff at all. Like
Kennedy wanted inspections. He sent multiple letters.
The Battle of Letters. He
wanted them registered as a foreign agent. Did he not want AIPAC registered as a foreign agent?
Yes, and the reason AIPAC came around was because it was the American Zionist Council that had been invading FARA. So between 48 when the beginning of Israel and 63, that's 15 years. That's the American Zionist Council evading registration under FARA,
which became AIPAC, which is what we know as AIPAC today.
Right. It's like that. Yeah. So when they got brought to court, they're like, "Oh, we don't have to register because we're not the American Zionist Council. We dissolved everything. We're nothing anymore." But while they transferred all their assets and everything over to AIPAC, and then what happens after Kennedy gets killed? Like the need for them to register goes away.
There is no need. They never did. I mean, it became Hollywood under Jack Valenti. I never saw it. So I knew who Jack Valenti was before I looked at your research, Corey. And I knew that he was influential because he was head of the MPAA and he was part of the whole narrative with The Godfather. And then, of course, the men who killed Kennedy, the 40th anniversary, where they tried to throw Lyndon Johnson under the bus. But it makes sense because someone who can control the narrative and who can. I mean, I was born in 1986, so I have certain things that have been implanted in my head since I was a little kid coming up. That's just basically a narrative, and you have to deprogram yourself. You have to re-educate yourself, and you have to be like, well, there was an agenda behind this, behind whatever you've been sold. So that's why even now it's amazing to see that there's Hollywood actors and actresses who are like, well, maybe we should do a ceasefire. I mean, maybe there's been 10,000 children genocided in Gaza. Why don't we talk about that?
Let me just say one thing real quick. I have to say something to Mateo real quick.
Are you watching?
I'm watching the chat. Like that quote is one of my favorites of all time. I do both kinds, country and Western. I use that all the time. So props to you on the Blues Brothers reference.
No, Mateo's a great. I know Mateo personally. I mean, he's a huge troll, but he's actually really, from what I remember personally, a really good guy, a good researcher, really cares about this. Presents online as a huge troll. Sorry.
Oh, people can troll me all they want because I know I'm right. So
Yeah.
welcome.
Well, so you wanted to respond to him. What did you want me to put up to respond to him?
Oh no, I appreciate his Blues Brothers reference. That's a great reference. There you go.
Yeah, there he is. Are you still in Mexico, by the way, Mateo? Or like, are you in? Where are you? Are you in Colorado? Or stop trolling and get out there. Get out there in the fight. Cory and I and Ryan are not. We don't hide behind message boards or anonymous anything. We have our names out there. So, sorry, Cory. You wanted to respond to that?
No, I didn't have anything to respond to.
Oh, he's in Mexico and Denver. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I'm in Fort Collins.
Hey.
Yeah, it's -9 degrees out.
It was cold here too. It's cold in New Hampshire, but
yeah, this has been brutal. This is the coldest I've ever. Well, no, once I was in -14, but -9 is pretty damn cold, man. I let my dogs piss on the floor. It's how cold it is.
With you can just scrape it. Yeah, horrible wind chill. No, New Hampshire gets pretty cold, but I was up in Newfoundland over the summer where my father was born. It gets cold up there, man. Icebergs in June, icebergs in July up there. Actually, you can still see icebergs. So, but the thing that got me into the Kennedy assassination was really my uncle. I was like 10 years old, and my uncle told me that when he was young in the early 70s, he saw a boat in the Boston Harbor, and the boat was called "Who Killed Kennedy." Was the name of the boat.
So once
he gave me Fletcher Prouty's book, and then I got into Garrison, and then from there. So
I need to directly credit Ryan Dawson with if anyone in the world should be credited with discovering the shooter on the Knoll, it's Ryan. Ryan discovered the identity of Valenti on the Knoll years before I did, but he's content to not talk about it. He just doesn't want to talk about it. I don't know why, but I can tell you with 100% certainty, Ryan came to the same conclusion I did independently years before I did. And so that just gives me
apparently somebody anonymously on a message board that you talk about.
That one freaks me out.
That's scary, Cory.
From 2004.
Yeah, that's really scary. So do you think his family knows? Like, do you think it's like the Hobbs family secret with the West Memphis case? Like, do you think there's other people out there who actually know, or like,
I don't know.
Do you think maybe a few people have just deduced because of we're going to take over somebody from a federal agency, even though Valenti was supposedly just part of an ad agency in Texas?
Well, I'll tell you what, the only people that I know of who have any kind of knowledge on this subject are myself, Ryan Dawson, and Doug Valentine. But Doug Valentine particularly won't talk about it and will deny it if he's asked about it. Yeah. Why, I don't know. I know that he's not writing anymore. He recently had a seizure. He's been going deaf for a long time, and he's having some blindness issues. So Doug Valentine's not in a good place. So he's not writing anymore. But if you haven't read Doug's books, he's the GOAT. He is the goddamn GOAT on the CIA, period. And he and Ryan both came to the same conclusion on Valenti years ago. So I don't have any qualms about it being Valenti at all.
They came to it kind of separately.
Yeah, well, based on the same data. But
it's like you're taking it further, though. You're kind of sorry.
Well, there are other people out there who have information on Valenti. Like, I can tell you right now that these guys, like, Ryan has information on Valenti he won't share with me. Like, he hasn't shared shit. Like, Ryan is very tight-lipped. He'll tell me if I'm being a fucking, if I'm wrong and I'm being a jerk off, and he'll laugh at me about some shit. But he won't tell me pretty much anything until I get it right. And then he'll kind of confirm. But he won't say a damn thing about Valenti, and he knows a lot more. And I'll tell you some things about Valenti. Valenti used numerous aliases. Otto Scorzani identified the shooter on the Knoll as having used the aliases of Zed and Max. I then connected Max to Trafficante and Frank Sturgis, and Max went to go train in No Name Key with another agent named Pierre, who I linked through the ZR rifle files as Jean-Pierre Lafitte. So based on my logic, I've traced Valenti through Trafficante to No Name Key and Sturgis and Jean-Pierre Lafitte, who met him there when he arrived. So, plus, I can tell you for certainty, I have two more aliases for Jack Valenti in my notes that I forget what they are. Pierre something and something else.
Sturgis was one of the plumbers, right?
Yeah. Oh, God, that guy's... He's behind the scenes and everything from, like, 59 onward. That guy's behind the scenes on everything, even though you don't hear about him.
All right. So your thesis. I mean, this is really your research, Corey. What you really truly believe. I'm going to look at everything. Like I'm not saying I'm sold on that. I'm not saying I'm against it. But like,
Well, here's the bottom line.
Valenti would have done the headshot. He would have had to haul ass to get into the motorcade from the grassy knoll.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you
and
what.
Then the photo of him when Johnson's being sworn in, Valenti does look very disheveled. That's all I'll say.
Yes. And also, I'll tell you what, I will, if I can find evidence to the contrary, I could possibly be convinced that Valenti was in the tunnel. I haven't done any research into that, but I could be
near James Tague.
Tague was in the middle. He was in the middle.
Yeah, he was of the underpass. He was in the middle part of the underpass. Hit the wound on his cheek.
When you look at how the tunnel is structured, it's not solid. There's it's almost like it's bricks, but there are big square windows almost that are cut out. So it's like a column. It's like brick columns almost with bricks all along the bottom and along the top, right? So it would almost look like brick windows there. But I could see how James Tague could be standing there and oh, fuck off. You don't know what you're talking about, Mateo. I love how people do 5 minutes of research and they think they know anything.
Well, no, I have to say for Mateo, he has been at it for a while.
Okay.
But
he's studying the wrong things if he hasn't come to the point yet.
We can disagree. Look, here's my thing, guys, all right? We can disagree. We can disagree about JFK assassination. We can disagree about 9/11. But we can still have like an adult conversation and not act like little trolls.
And he's not a shooter because he's a Knight of Malta. That's hilarious. That is that's to die for. So, but ultimately, I could be convinced that he was in the tunnel. But for the time being, Ryan claims to have additional evidence he was on the knoll that he won't share with me. But I put some weight to that. But at the same time, I could be convinced he was in the tunnel. But he was definitely the deliverer of the headshot, unquestionably, because he ends up on the Secret Service car on the other side of the knoll.
So you think that's not Jack Reedy? That's
definitely not Jack Reedy, because Jack Reedy admits that he hopped into the Secret Service car. I have his statement right here. He hopped in the Secret Service car in Dealey Plaza. He claims to have hopped in the front seat, which is provably false by the McIntyre photo number 2. Because McIntyre photo number 2, there's still only 2 people in the front seat. So John D. Jack Reedy lied, because in his statement, he says he says he ran to the fucking president's limo and then was called back and then hopped back in over the side of the car into the front seat. None of that's on the Zapruder film, okay? But by his own words, he's in there in the middle of Dealey Plaza, and so it absolutely is not Reedy.
So do you think the floating head is
I don't know what to think of that. I don't know what to
Morales?
think of that. I saw
not Kennedy. It's not Kennedy, because a lot of the publications identify it as Kennedy.
A lot of the publications do identify it as Kennedy, but
it's not. I don't think it's Kennedy.
Correct. And it's got a flat top. Am I not mistaken?
Yeah. But there's no way it's him, because Jackie is like here with the pink,
But it's floating. It's like a weird float. It's like weird and floating, like it shouldn't be there.
Somebody crouching down on the back of the car, in my opinion.
Well, it couldn't be the back of the car because of the proportions and where the bumper was. Like, trust me, I've spent like hours staring at this thing, going, "What is going on with his head?" Right? So,
right. You've looked at it. Yep.
But either way, my opinion is that Morales stepped onto the Secret Service car immediately. So the Secret Service car pulls in. You have Clint Hill gets off and runs to the president's limo. The Secret Service car had to stop because Dave Powers exits. It is at this time that Dave Powers exits. John Reedy gets into the second row of seats, and Morales steps onto the side of the car. That's the only series of events that could have possibly happened. Reedy was in there, and so that means that Paul Landis also had to be in there, because by the time he gets to the overpass, there's only one person on the side of the car. So it means everybody got in. Paul Landis and Reedy entered in the middle of Dealey Plaza, because the only person on the car at McIntyre photo number 1 is David Morales. And then obviously in McIntyre photo number 1, you have what appears to be a man standing in the back of the president's limo with the rifle. I'm sure you've spent some time looking at that photo too.
I have. Yeah, I've looked at
What's your opinion on that photo? Because that thing drives me up a wall. That thing makes me feel like I'm crazy.
Well, I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, have you heard the theory of the Secret Service guy who accidentally shot Kennedy?" I'm like, no.
That's ridiculous.
That's not what that is. It's interesting to me to see Landis come out just last year. What is he, like 87, 88 years old? I see somebody who has trauma and maybe some guilt because of what he knows.
All of those guys in the Secret Service car knew exactly what happened, because all of them were complicit, and this includes Kenny O'Donnell, who was one of Kennedy's best friends, allegedly.
Well, you're talking about the Irish Mafia, Kenny O'Donnell. Powers and O'Donnell were like friends with Kennedy going back years.
Yeah.
And they talk about smelling gunfire at street level, like Ralph Yarborough, street level. So you think were they scared to say what they knew, or do you actually think they were complicit?
Kenny Powers was inside. Kenny Powers, Kenny O'Donnell, or not Kenny Powers.
Oh, Kenny Powers, isn't that
Kenny
the fucking
O'Donnell.
Jenny McBride?
Yeah. Kenny O'Donnell was inside the limo, and at the same time that Valenti and Morales were on the side. So every goddamn person in that limo knew that. So every person in that limo was complicit. You know who else is complicit? Clint Hill. They're all complicit. They're all in on this. The Secret Service is all in on this.
Well, I know Clint Hill dealt with alcoholism, and if you've ever seen the movie In the Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood, which is it's based on Clint Hill, where they have, John Malkovich is trolling.
Imagine you knew the president was murdered in a conspiracy and you were a witness and complicit in it, and they made movies about you being a hero your whole life. How would you feel? I
already hit the bottle as it is, but I'd hit the bottle even more. Yeah.
Yep. And look at Kenny O'Donnell. He drank himself to death.
I think he died in 1976 or something like that. Yeah.
Drank himself to death.
Well, I mean,
all of these guys were in on it.
Yeah, but you're talking about a power you're talking about a force that's even more powerful than you can even imagine. Like, yes. I mean, even Ralph Yarborough and John Connolly with their Connolly.
All these guys in the Secret Service, and including Kenny O'Donnell, to be in on this, they had to know that fucking Kennedy, they knew in their hearts that Kennedy was a communist. And that's why they went along with this. They did not agree with anything he did, and he knew they betrayed everybody at the Bay of Pigs, which really isn't what happened, but that's the story.
It's not
the story what happened.
But that's why
I can see all turned on him, even his closest people turned on him.
Some of the people involved in the plot had to be like, this. Kennedy was a threat to America. He was pro-communist. We couldn't get him in Miami. We couldn't get him in Chicago. Like, yeah, no. Do I think that some of the plotters truly believed in their hearts that Kennedy was a threat to hegemony and to America and to, maybe. Yeah. I mean, that movie Executive Action?
And this is important too, their concerns are completely compartmentalized and separate from the Israeli concerns. People need to understand this.
Well, the Israeli concerns are, we have to register as a foreign agent. We have to kill.
Kennedy's going to end us as a nation if we don't fucking do what he says with the
even
registering. With all that stuff. It was an existential crisis for them.
Right. Netanyahu even recently used that same argument for the complete bombardment and destruction of Palestine. I forget the name of what it was called for the.
If Kennedy would have lived, the Nakba, if Kennedy would have lived, this wouldn't be happening right now in Palestine at all. There would not be in Israel today, because Kennedy would have seen. Kennedy was a vicious anti-Semite, period. He did not appreciate the state of Israel. He didn't feel these Jews needed a country. And when he saw what they were doing with,
Mateo says they killed him because he was Catholic, and he says he's not.
That's the 10 minutes of research conclusion. So the reality is that he was going to end Israel as a country. He was going to shut down the nuclear program. He was going to make them register as a foreign agent. And every single action he was going to take, he was going to cut off financial aid. Every single thing he was going to do was going to result in a large-scale war invasion by the surrounding Arab nations, and there would have been no Israel today. We wouldn't be dealing with this, and the Palestinians would have their country back. That's the bottom line. That's why Israel killed Kennedy at the end of the day.
So here we are 60 years later with your thesis about Israel, and which, of course, there is. I mean, with Jack Ruby and everything else you've laid out, where do we go from here? Like, we have 10,000 children dead. We have 23,000 people. I mean, South Africa just ruled that this is a genocide.
Yeah.
That's going on. So
I don't know why people are surprised. I mean, Hitler warned us about these people 100 years ago, and everyone's like shocked that this is happening today. To me, it's ridiculous.
I mean, I'm just talking about like what's going on.
Sure. Every single person out there needs to read the original Mein Kampf, as old a translation as you can get, because what you're going to find is that what's going on in America today with all this destruction of our culture, through trans movement, through this DEI nonsense, and what's going on in Palestine today is all being orchestrated by the same people. And we were warned 100 years ago, but yet here we are today. And we're going, what's going on? I wonder why America's falling apart. No, this is not a mystery to me whatsoever. And if Kennedy would have lived, there wouldn't be Israel. And the entire, what I call the global Jewish establishment, would have begun to crumble under his watch if he'd have lived. That's why he was killed. All these other things like the Federal Reserve or Vietnam are just like minor incidental reasons, which are to me are ridiculous. This is the most existential crisis in the world for Israel and for Kennedy as well, because he gave that speech on nuclear deproliferation, right? He wanted to get rid of nukes around the world. He was in talks with Khrushchev to get rid of nukes. And what were the Israelis' number one priority in 1963? To get the bomb.
To get nukes, yeah. I mean, well, Khrushchev supposedly cried when he went to sign the book. He went and signed the book at the funeral of Kennedy. And Charles de Gaulle, which we didn't even get into tonight, Charles de Gaulle blamed Permindex or players connected to Permindex for his assassination.
100%.
Have you seen the quote? Have you seen the quote that de Gaulle said about Kennedy's death?
I don't think so.
Kennedy was killed as a soldier. I'm paraphrasing in the line of duty. Is de Gaulle's quote about Kennedy's death. So.
Yeah. So Permindex was behind the attempts on Charles de Gaulle, although there was some speculation that those were not genuine attempts. They were warnings. And though Permindex was behind the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, and then you have ties back to ZR Rifle and the CIA. And you have like Jean-Pierre Lafitte was in the Congo at the time that happened. I mean, it's all the same players through Permindex. And remember, Permindex, who sat on the board of directors of Permindex? Angleton, Dulles, Joe Bonanno, Modalitz, right? Two mob bosses. And then you had like all Roy Cohn, Tibor Rosenbaum. I mean, it's a who's who of
Roy Cohn was Trump's like original like lawyer kind of teacher
in the 1980s, exactly. And so that's what Permindex was. It was a who's who of mafia, CIA, and Israelis. It was the proof that they all work together. And then you have the CMC, which is Centre Mondial Commercial, which was technically incorporated in Italy, but it was run out of Montreal by a guy named Louis Bloomfield. This is where you have like the Clay Shaw connection to Bloomfield, because you have multiple trips of these guys, of David Ferry flying to Montreal, allegedly with like Lambert and Diaz. Well, those trips with Lambert and Diaz to Montreal were actually David Ferry flying Clay Shaw, Kerry Thornley, and Sergio Arcacha Smith up there to meet with, assuming, members of the Montreal Mafia and Louis Bloomfield for the CMC connection, because the orders came down from, like I said, the Mossad to Permindex, the CMC to Clay Shaw.
Right, because there's some literature that says that Oswald was in Canada, that Oswald was in Montreal, right? Like there were, well, then in today's MLK Day, so let's just say, also the MLK assassination, you have reason to believe that the gunman was actually Valenti and MLK.
Yeah, I'm telling you right now, it's pure speculation, but I have 100% identified Raul as Vincent Calderon Jr., who was not only the short tramp in Dealey Plaza, but he was the former brother-in-law of Jack Valenti. And this all connects through the Winterland stuff, which was really like, the Winterland to me was like the nail in the coffin on the official story, really, because it connected all these dots, And so when you get to Vincent Calderon Jr., Vincent Calderon Jr. is the real Raul. And so if Vincent Calderon Jr. is the real Raul who set up James Earl Ray, my thinking is that these guys use the same partners their whole lives. These guys are not willy-nilly. You better have your spotter had better be with you for life. Like,
they got handlers with them for all the time.
Yeah, like Yaris and Patrick. Yaris and Patrick were assassination partners for 50 years by the time the assassination occurred. You know what I mean? So like
a married couple.
Exactly. You better trust that guy who's got your back. You know what I mean? And so I believe that was the relationship between Vincent Calderon Jr. and Jack Valenti on the Knoll specifically. And then if Vincent Calderon Jr. is the real Raul, then to me, the logical next step is that Jack Valenti was the shooter. Although and then another piece of evidence I have for that is when you go through the newspaper articles, you won't find this in any book. The day after the Martin Luther King assassination, there's an article, I have a clipping of it. It clearly says that a short, balding white man was arrested in front of the boarding house and funneled by police to a federal building in Memphis. And then no one's ever heard of that ever again. That's it. That's the only reference we have to it. A short, balding white man was arrested in front of the boarding house, taken to a federal building, and then that person disappeared.
That's it.
I guarantee that person is either Vincent Calderon Jr., Raul, or Jack Valenti. I'm hoping it's Valenti, but hopefully I'll get to it one day. I mean, I figure I got another 30 years in me. I'll get to it at some point.
I mean, Dr. William F. Pepper did a lot of work on this too. I met Pepper a couple times, and he's still going. But Martin Luther King's family was part of a suit in front of the judge, and Lloyd, I think it was named Lloyd Jowers, or the guy there who they say was connected to James Earl Ray, was involved in a much deeper plot with the Memphis police and the FBI. And they were looking at Martin Luther King. I mean, there's a famous...
So there's a guy named like Eggers or something like that who was accused. There's some guy who was like a bar owner or something. It was.
Yep.
I don't buy any of that stuff at all.
The restaurant. Yeah, that's probably a cover. But
it's a cover. I don't buy anything like
the point is the King family knows it's bullshit too.
Yeah,
they know it's bullshit. They know it's bullshit, and it is. So,
and also, Jack Valenti was traveling at the time. He was not in D.C. He was traveling for the Motion Picture Association of America at the time. And the day after the assassination, he had an article that he wrote where he was all sad and stuff in the newspaper. So whenever I see stuff like that, to me, it just like sets off alarm bells, knowing what I know about Valenti.
Sends off fakiness. Well, that's amazing. But all right, we're at the 2-hour, almost 40-minute mark, guys. So I think this might be a good place to stop. I want to do more episodes with you. I mean,
sure.
Guys, Cory Hughes has looked at this stuff inside and out, and
you can get it in my book. My book is available on Amazon. So
yeah, check out A Warning from History.
And if you want autographed copies, you can email me or contact me. I sell autographed soft covers for $50, and people have been buying them like crazy. I can't keep them in stock. So if you want an autographed copy, hit me up.
Well, you've done the work. I mean, you've done the research, and it's not fun. It's not pretty.
No, I gave up 5 years of my life and did nothing. But seriously,
12 hours a day.
Yeah, get high and study the shit. That's all I fucking did.
Well, whatever you do to get through it, man, it is important work. And we've been remember the Peter Jennings thing on the 40th anniversary? How gross that was.
Yeah.
And everything that we've seen since then is so disgusting and such a lie and so just derogatory and appalling for our 35th president. That we need to have podcasts like this, and we need to have books like this that lay out the actual evidence and names, and is willing to talk about it. If we get stuff.
That's one thing I'm really proud of in the book is that there isn't a conclusion that I present that I've made without the supporting evidence. And if I'm going out like on left field and being like, hey, this is a long shot, but I think this is what happened, I straight up say, hey, this is a long shot, but I think is what happened. So I try to like, even with the conclusions I draw, I try to, put as much supporting evidence as possible.
Absolutely. All right. We got a couple more chats before we end it. Texit, a great longtime fan. Great show, Mike and Cory. Definitely going to buy the book. Guys, you should buy the book. All right. And let me get it here one more time. I'm going to promote it. I'm not going to promote anything I don't believe in or think is worthwhile. A Warning from History, Cory Hughes. He's done the fucking work. Dude, if you read this book, and you even have like a cursory understanding of the Kennedy assassination, there's no way you're not going to be completely disturbed by it and want to learn more. Fire Pixie. Great show.
Oh, hey, Pixie.
Yeah, Pixies. Yeah, they're great to see you, Fire Pixie. And then we got Mateo. Permindex was a nomenclature of an assassination cabal.
Okay. The nomenclature of an assassination paper that was put out is completely a disinformation bullshit document.
Well, hey, you know what, Mateo, Matt, come on the podcast. You have an open invite. You got my email. You want to troll and make comments. I respect you as a Kennedy researcher. I respect Cory as a Kennedy researcher. I respect Ryan Dawson as a Kennedy researcher. Come on the show and make your case. Let's have a discussion. Cory, you'll come on and talk to him, right? You'll talk to the haters and the trolls. And
sure.
I don't believe in being a troll. Dude, I had my name out there. Like, I have what I believe, and Cory has answered my questions tonight, about the motorcade and the Secret Service and whatever. So I appreciate that. So, all right, folks, that's going to do it for tonight. If you want to look into more of Cory's work, go to coryhughes.org, check out his book, and we'll see you next time.
My notes are also available, just so you know. All my original notes, 650 pages of notes, are available at buymeacoffee.com/JFK book. So instead of just the book, you have my substantiation and my documents and all that you can get as well. So,
and where you came to it. And hopefully we'll do this again with Cory, but thank you guys. We'll see you next time.